Greetings. My name is Michael Ignacio Jr., and I'm the owner and creative director of Kapuha Press LLC. The following segments are the first 3 chapters from the audio drama, The Wrath of the Forgotten. If you like what you hear, please like the video, share it, and consider purchasing the full audio drama from Audible and/or Amazon. I have provided links for the audio drama on Amazon and Audible below in the description. Thank you, and please enjoy. Chapter 1. Tove gazed upon the city full of people who were destined to be slaughtered. A sudden chill crawled up his spine with a slow, determined pace. The wind blew through his long red hair, and his strands blew back behind him. He took a deep breath and shook his hands slightly in order to perhaps shake off his anxiety. His inside still hummed with a potent anxiety that left him feeling hollow inside. Dozens of dark gray mountains stood around him in the city like silent, eerie spectators. A brilliant blue sky hung overhead. Only a few clouds hung listlessly about, creating smaller shadows on the rocky ground. Tove drew in another breath, and his head swam. A small cyclone of dizziness danced in his head. He dismissed it. Tall stone walls, the same color as the surrounding rocks, stood erect in the distance. Humans clad in battle armor patrolled the tops of the walls. Due to the guards' relaxed movement patterns, Tove and his numerous friends had remained unnoticed. Had they been discovered, the giant stone wall that made up the front gate of Onista would have been closed. At the moment, however, the iron portcullis was raised into the hidden recesses of the gatehouse. Thousands of homes spanned the interior of the city, all populated by the dreaded Onistan people. Though they were still human, the Onistans were something different, something dangerous. The day would be painted by blood. If Tove were alone, he could enter the city with relative ease. Humans always confused his kind, the Yaguar, as sickly-looking people just like them. Their ignorance often proved to be disastrous, just as it would today. Tove took several steps back out of sight and whirled around to behold his friends. Well, friends wasn't the right word. Most creatures avoided the Yaguar like plague carriers, and those who interacted with the sickly-looking race did so with extreme reservation. The Oni didn't care about the so-called curse that lingered around the Yaguar. The Oni were quite unique. These ogres had 2 variations of skin color, fire red or ocean blue. Massive horns jutted from each of their skulls. Thick hair sprouted from their scalps like untamed bushes, and sharp teeth and lower protruding tusks jutted from their thin lips. Each of the Oni stood at least 10 feet tall and had body types that ranged from extremely muscular to overweight. They all carried gigantic weapons and were poorly maintained battle armor, made from leather cords and lacquered plates. Tove's head came no higher than the chest of the shortest of the ogres. One of the largest blue Onis stepped up to Tove as he approached them. This ogre had a thick black beard on his chin and a golden crown upon his brow. A massive axe rested against the Oni's right shoulder. His blood-red eyes glimmered in the sunlight. The Oni King licked his lips. His voice rumbled like a landslide.
So, are we going to start this thing before lunch? My boys are itching for human flesh.
Calm yourself, Your Highness. You'll have your fill of blood, gore, and violence soon enough. We haven't received the signal yet.
The Oni King tightened the grip on his axe's haft.
Your Yaogoi grunts had better come soon. I've been dreaming of this moment ever since I was small enough to slurp on my mother's teat.
My people will do their part. Make sure that your warriors do the same. Our masters have high expectations of you.
Have you forgotten who I am, little Yaogoi? I am Gajok, the Blue Death. The Masters have nothing to fear with me, leading their army.
2 bright yellow wings of energy burst from Tove's back. He leapt into the air and rose up so that his nose nearly touched the Onis.
You're not leading this army. I am. You will go when I tell you to, or I'll put you down. Do I make myself clear?
For a long moment, Gajok locked eyes with Tove. Tension crackled in the air. Tove's palms became moist. His bones trembled within his limbs. His spirit exploded into an enormous inferno. A great liquid heat seeped into Tove's veins, and any anxiety that quaked within him abated. The rage festered into his eyes. Gajok licked his lips and took a single step back away from Tove.
I understand what you're saying. I don't want to cause problems with you. I simply want human flesh.
Tove landed at Gajok's feet. His wings dissipated into his back.
Prepare your forces then. I anticipate my scouts will be returning soon.
It looks like we're in luck. Here they come.
Tove rounded and gazed at the small group of Yaogwai flying toward him. His heart stopped. He clenched his fist tightly as he walked up to the group before it. Like all Yaogwai, the 4 individuals resembled humans who possessed various darkened blotches on their skin. They appeared haggard and exhausted, and their faces were gaunt and wrought with anguish. Energy wings of various colors extended off of their backs. The young girl at the front of the group beamed a sheepish smirk at him as she landed. She possessed light pink wings.
The scout returning, Commander. I have news to report.
What are you doing here? I didn't bring you along.
The younger woman averted her eyes for a moment.
I know that. I came anyway. I'm one of the fastest flyers in our entire tribe, and you know it. This mission needed stealth, speed, and grace. I have all those things.
Problems, Commander Tove?
Shut up, you fool. Do you want them to hear you? This is supposed to be a surprise attack.
Immediately, the Oni King stopped laughing, but a smug smirk still creased his dark blue face.
As for you,
Tove pointed at the young woman.
I explicitly told you I didn't want you participating in this mission. It's too dangerous.
Yurei clutched her hands behind her back and stood up with her back straight.
I wanted to help too. I'm just as patriotic as you are. I've seen the plight of our people. Why can't I serve like these guys? They get to risk their lives. What makes me so special that I must remain safe?
Tove breathed out a heavy sigh before he chuckled.
You're just like your mother. I'm your commanding officer, and you will obey me. As soon as you give me the report, you're going back home. All of you. It's going to get dangerous. I want all of you safe. Are we clear?
Yurei's face lit up like a miniature sun cresting over the horizon.
Yes, Father. The Oni-stans are unaware about the impending attack. However, they're on guard because none of their scouts have returned. As the hour passes, they will become more agitated. Most of their guards and militia are gathered along the southern and eastern wall. Their defenses on the western wall are non-existent. The north gate has minimal forces.
Good. We still have the element of surprise. Return home and let the elders know the attack has begun.
Permission to speak freely, Commander?
Go on. I could never prevent you from speaking before. Why should I think to do it now?
You're going to fight, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Tove reached up and placed a hand on her shoulder.
No, you can't help me. Yes, I have to do this. Yes, I'll send word as soon as the battle is won. If there is nothing more, then I need you to leave right now. We have to get this battle underway.
Yurei narrowed her eyes for a moment, but then nodded. She reached up and grazed her fingers against Tove's cheek.
I understand. I love you, Father. Fight well. Live on. Our people need you. The Celestial Ones need you.
The light pink energy wings extended from Yurei's back. She leapt into the air and hovered for a moment as her 3 friends joined her.
Go. I'll be fine.
Yurei nodded before she turned and soared away from the city of Onista. Tove waited until she disappeared behind the mountain peaks, and then gazed up at Gejok.
Sound your war horn. Leave no man, woman, or child alive.
Gejok reached for the war horn at his side and brought it up to his face. From the looks of it, it had been constructed from the broken horns of other Oni. The Oni King licked his lips again before he pressed them against the mouthpiece. A thunderous resounding note pierced the air. A second similar horn echoed from the south. A third called from the east. Thousands of Oni raised their weapons high and screamed out as one. The sudden debut of so many voices struck Tove like a winter avalanche. Harmonized battle cries echoed in other parts of the mountains as well. A great pressure slapped down on Tove, but he dismissed it as he summoned his wings again. He rose into the air and stared down into Onista, the city of the enemy. To their credit, the humans roared back at the unseen Oni in defiance. More armored warriors ran on top of the walls. The gigantic portcullis within the gatehouse slammed shut. Onista had braced itself for its death. Drumbeats overtook the Oni roars. Thunder reverberated despite the clear blue sky. Tove's spear trembled too. The Oni army poured out of hiding like a flooded river. Each of the giant creatures clutched their chosen weapons eagerly. The anticipation of death polluted the air. Tove nearly choked on that stink. Archers started collecting on the top of the walls. Tove screamed down to his Oni comrades, but their war chants drowned out his voice. They were on their own, much like Tove was. Nothing could stop the tide of doom that would befall these pathetic, treacherous humans. Still, Tove forced back the urge to tear up. He controlled his breathing and held out his hand in front of him. Tove couldn't afford to waver in his convictions now. The Yaogwei people wouldn't survive if the Onistans were not slaughtered. Magic coursed through his fingertips. Energy flowed out from his skin, taking shape. Within seconds, Tove held a long, slender, yellow energy blade. A loud, collective thwunk reverberated in the air. Tove's heart beat faster as he gazed up. A humongous black cloud blocked out the sun for only a moment, and the storm of arrows fell toward both Tove and the Oni. So it had truly begun. Nothing could stop the tide. The boat lurched to a stop beside one of the many piers that lay before the great western city of Jedi. Dozens of other ships were connected to the mooring as well. People walked onto and off of many ships, all going about their daily routines. They had become used to this wharf and the city itself. Would Noorie ever find that same sense of comfort? Noorie stood on the deck of the ship as the sailors lowered the gangplank and secured the vessel to the large posts. Other passengers started collecting on the deck as well. They all cast disturbed glances toward Noorie as they passed by him. It wasn't anything Noorie hadn't seen before. Most people assumed that Onistans were stupid brutes. Several of the other passengers whispered to one another, as if Noorie couldn't hear them.
Can they lower the gangplank already? The sooner we get away from the legs of him, the better.
A woman sneered at him and nudged another lady beside her.
What is that damned ogre staring at? I really wish he hadn't come on this trip.
Ogre. Outwardly, Noorie didn't react to their statements. His stomach churned. An empty, throbbing feeling pulsated in his chest. Every breath felt a little heavier with each consecutive intake. Sure, he had heard the word directed at him both to his face and behind his back over the last few years. Every time he did, a little piece of him inside had shuddered. It wasn't Norrie's fault that others were born so small or frail. Onistans were just big people. To be fair to the people, Noorie had not only possessed great stature, but he also carried an unusual battle weapon with him. He only paid the other passengers notice a little while longer before he focused on the city of Jedi. A stone wall wrapped around the city itself, barring it from the docks. A great archway and gatehouse opened up and allowed entry and exit into the city. The stone wall looked sturdy enough, for lowlanders anyway. They wouldn't have compared to the marvels that his people would have crafted. To be fair to the lowlanders, they didn't have access to the same high quality of stone that Onistans did. Noorie couldn't see the actual buildings of the city yet, aside from the colorful spires standing over the walls. Would their architecture be anything similar to the practical simplicity that he had grown up with? Would it have the elegance and sophistication that the capital of Xianba had boasted? Or would it be something more common, like the other cities that the ship had passed by on its long voyage down the river? Noorie had seen very few places that even remotely resembled his beloved mountain home. The terrain surrounding Jedi had a unique wonder. His heart danced at the prospect of seeing yet another new place. The urge to smile tickled his lips, but Noorie maintained a stoic expression. The lowlanders had the impression that he was a dumb brute. Why rob them of that notion when he could keep them ignorant and unenlightened? The people on the docks all wore the same kinds of thinner clothing materials that people in the capital wore. People adorned silk and cotton fabrics of various hues. The men typically wore slacks and long-sleeve shirts, while the women usually wore dresses. Noorie also wore a silk garment, although he would have preferred wool. Noorie stood next to one of the rails of the ship. Two very large sacks and a loot case lay beside him. Noorie held his tetsubo in front of him, with the top edge of it being placed against the deck of the ship. The large war club had large square metal studs embedded in the sides of the weapon. Each of those metal studs could smash bone, stone, wood, or even metal, provided that Noorie put enough force behind the swing. While the rest of the world shunned him, Noorie always felt calm when he had his beloved tetsubo close by. Even touching it now reminded him of home. As soon as the sailors secured the gangplank, the other passengers briskly walked over to the exit and onto the pier. Noorie waited until only he and the sailors remained on board. One of the sailors approached him. The man only came to Norrie's chest, which was typical of most lowlander males.
Hey you! It's time to move along. The ride is over.
Noorie hoisted the pair of large sacks and the wooden case onto one shoulder while he rested the Detsubo against the other shoulder. As the weapon traveled through the air, the other sailors froze. They had already witnessed what Noorie could do with his war club during the river pirate raid several days ago. Noorie bit the inside of his lip. No one moved as he made his way to the gangplank. He stopped before he descended onto the pier and gazed back over his shoulder. The sailors had continued to watch him with palpable discomfort. Several of them nervously toyed with whatever they were holding. Others stood defiantly, waiting for him to do something heinous.
I've never been to Judai before. Can you please direct me to the university?
One of the more brash sailors waved his hand at him.
We're not your tour guides. Find it yourself.
The air grew tenser. Several workers on the docks stopped what they were doing and gaped open-eyed and open-mouthed at him. The longer that Noorie stood in place, the more people noticed him and regarded him as if he were some kind of river monster. A wild tingling danced in Norrie's stomach, but he pressed it down deeper into himself. This was not the first time he would have to acclimate among lowlanders. Perhaps Judai wouldn't be as uncomfortable as the capital was. Noorie moved down onto the pier and started walking toward the city gate. An all-too-familiar silence heralded his coming. More people halted in their steps and watched him. In his wake, quiet murmurings crept up like flowers. The crowds thickened with more people as Noorie got closer to the Judai city gate. However, as soon as people noticed Noorie behind them, they gave him a wide berth. Noorie studied the 40-feet-high stone walls as he got closer. In many places, stone blocks jutted out ever so slightly. One or two soldiers walked atop the walls. Based upon the movements, they did so lackadaisical. Noorie frowned. Several armed guards stood at the city gates, each armed with spears. They wore light blue-colored breastplates, tan-colored slacks, and matching light blue helmets. The guards stopped everyone who wished to enter the city, and they either traded soft-spoken words or performed passionless searches through sacks of questionable sizes. When the guards noticed Noorie, they stepped back and lowered their spears in defense. A collective gasp echoed from behind him. Instantly, the noise on the docks stopped. One of the female guards stepped forward. Her armor appeared a little more decorated, and her helmet had a yellow stripe running down the center of its bowl. She didn't have a spear, but a sword hung at her belt.
Hold on for a moment. Where do you think you're going? That's a very big weapon you have there.
Well, I am a very big fellow. Am I breaking any of Judai's laws by carrying a weapon?
No, you're not breaking any laws per se. I still want to know where you're going. You're liable to make decent citizens nervous with that massive club of yours.
Noorie shifted his stance to the side and gazed behind him. Dozens of eyes watched him eagerly. Many more observers stood in the mouth of the gate leading into Judai. Only the sound of anxious breathing broke the aura of complete silence that had dominated the docks moments before. Noorie swallowed in hopes to moisten his dry throat. He regarded the female guard again.
I am headed to the Judai University of Magic. Would you be so kind as to show me the way?
One of the guards took a step closer to him. Why are you going there?
My business is my own. I'd appreciate it if you gave me directions and let me go on my way.
The female guard rested a hand at her hip, right beside her sword hilt.
It's our business to protect the citizens from perceived dangers.
Am I a perceived danger because I'm a warrior? Or because I'm an Onistan?
The female guard's facial expression softened, and she let out a little sigh. None of the other guards said a word or moved a muscle. They kept switching their glances between Noorie and the woman.
Are you in charge?
I am. I'm Lieutenant Judgy. And you are?
I'm a weary traveler who's not breaking any laws, and who's minding my own business. You can't detain me if I've done nothing wrong. If you're not going to help me, I'm going to find someone who will. Good day to you.
He moved closer to the gate. The other guards grabbed their weapons tightly, but Lieutenant Judgy held up her hand. One by one, they lowered their spears and moved out of the way. As Noorie passed by her, Lieutenant Judgy spoke.
Head into the city and search for the large fountain. Take a right and keep going until you see the large tower. That's the university.
Thank you.
Just as before, the crowds of people parted ways for him, but observed his passing with horrified intrigue. Norrie's insides trembled. A great weight tugged down on the skin of his face, but Noorie refused to frown or show any sort of reaction. In Xianba, he had grown accustomed to the bitterness of others. With each step and breath, the vast storm of emotions swirling within him subsided. Several powerful aromas wafted all around him as soon as Noorie emerged into the city. Immense streets wide enough to accommodate 10 people walking side by side stretched before him. 2- and 3-story wooden buildings with brown-thatched roofs lined the avenues. Between each building existed narrow alleyways. Before the buildings sat large carts covered in assortments of food, drink, and knickknacks. of peddlers yelled out deals to many passerbys. Unevenly placed blocks made up the streets, much like the walls that surrounded Jedi. At first, no one really noticed Noorie. Then one of the vendors screamed, and all eyes darted around to see what the commotion was. Noorie let out another sigh as he continued to move through the crowd. As he got closer to the other people, they parted ways. A small notion popped in his mind, and he allowed himself to smile. If these lowlanders thought he appeared imposing now, they would run in terror if they saw him in his typical attire. Noorie passed by several street intersections, and they all looked the same to him. The same style of wooden houses with thatched roofs curling around the poorly made streets. At least in Onista, the buildings, roads, and defenses were better constructed. After walking several blocks, Noorie came to a large fountain, which sat in the middle of a vast open plaza. Adults rested at tables set in various parts of the plaza, and they ate food while their children chased one another and played games. Soft music danced on the breeze. Norrie's eyes widened as he scanned the area for the source. He stood up on the tips of his toes, but he couldn't see who played the music. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. Noorie couldn't afford time to sit and relax. He let out a disgruntled sigh and studied the fountain a little more. The fountain had been carved with images of people dancing and having fun. It had a large basin at the bottom, and people perched themselves along its edge. 2 more tiers extended from the basin. At the top of the fountain, a statue of a great horse stood up on its back legs. Its front hooves had been raised up. Water poured out of its mouth. Noorie strolled down the street directly to the fountain's right. A tall tower extended into the sky at the far end of the street. The tower had 5 perceivable levels, and each of the tiers had ringed roofs that wrapped around the edges. A balcony extended on the topmost tier. The entire tower had been painted with rainbow stripes that wrapped all the way around it from top to bottom. Noorie winced. Just gazing at it made his head feel slightly woozy. Not even Xianba had a structure that looked so garish. A small white wall stood erect around the tower's base. 2 guards stood in front of the gate that led to the university, and they talked amongst themselves until Noorie broke through the crowd. Their armor was colored with a combination of white and dark blue hues. Swords hung at their belts. Neither of the guards made motion for their weapons, but they balled their fists as Noorie got ever closer.
Whoa! Where do you think you're going? This is the Jedi University of Magic. You lost or something?
Noorie knelt down and set his bags and loot case on the ground. He rested his Tetsubo beside the bags and started rifling through one of the sacks. After a moment, he pulled out a slender scroll. Slowly, he reached out and pointed it at one of the guards.
This is a letter from your headmistress, Madame Howe. I'm supposed to show you her signature, and then you're supposed to let me in.
One of the guards took the scroll and unrolled it. His mouth formed a tight line between his cheeks. The man's eyes darted from top to bottom. After a moment, he rolled the scroll back up, and then handed it back to Noorie.
Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. If you'll please follow me, I'll show you how to get to Madame Howe's office.
Noorie collected his things and followed the guard inside. Something very small tugged at him internally, and so he indulged in his curiosity. Noorie glanced back over his shoulder. A large crowd gazed in absolute astonishment. The fear they had once openly directed at him had been consumed by something even greater. As the doors to the university closed behind him, Noorie beamed a mischievous smile at the crowd. The exterior of the tower had been plain stone and plaster, but the insides possessed a kind of grandness that only the Imperial Palace surpassed. Sleek, dark wooden floorboards spanned the hallways. Beautiful paintings clung to the walls. The air smelled of jasmine and lilacs. The foyer of the tower had a great open chamber that had a ceiling 30 feet above Norrie's head. A wide stone stairwell with railings wrapped around the interior of the wall and disappeared into the ceiling, presumably leading to the next floor. 2 corridors split off from the foyer, and numerous doorways lined each of them. The guard stopped at the base of the stairs. He pointed upward.
This staircase goes all the way to the top floor. Once you get there, one of the guards stationed there can take you to Madame Howe's office. You'll no doubt have to show your scroll to them as well. We don't get many Onistans in this part of the Empire. In fact, I don't think we've ever seen your kind here.
My people seldom leave Onista unless it's due to Imperial decree. Thank you for your help.
The guard turned away and moved to the front door, so Noorie began his ascent. The stairwell opened up to a smaller chamber where corridors connected to it. Everything was very quiet. Doors were closed. Noorie climbed to the 3rd floor. The floor actually had bustling human activity. Some people stood in the smaller chamber while others moved down the corridors. Each of the people wore silk garments that varied from person to person. Many of the people had intricate invisible tattoos on their bodies. Tidbits of words had found their way into Norrie's ears, but he didn't quite understand what the people were talking about exactly. One of the people noticed him and stopped their conversation. That led to more people turning their attention to him. Much like the docks in the city, these people also stared at Noorie wonderingly. While some people appeared apprehensive or frightened at his presence, others gaped at him with an unusual sparkle that Noorie was not accustomed to. If these people were warriors, Noorie would have assumed it was something akin to wanting to challenge him in physical combat. These people weren't warriors, though. They were mages. A shiver scrambled down his back, and so Noorie started to climb the stairs to the 4th floor. Shuffling feet echoed behind him. The mages, or perhaps mage students, filled the doorway connecting to the 3rd floor and their stairwell. Delicate whispers crackled on the edge of comprehension. Noorie quickened his pace. The 4th floor had more people gathered around in discussion, although not nearly as many as the 3rd floor. Noorie didn't stop to view them, nor did he want to be viewed. It was going to be hard enough to keep a low profile given his birth-given features. Noorie reached the top of the stairs, and a pair of guards held their hands out toward him.
Halt! Who are you? What business do you have here in the university?
Noorie produced the scroll again.
I've been summoned by Madame Howe. I have her letter as proof of my claim.
The guards took the scroll and examined it. They peered back up at him.
Please wait here while I announce you. Your name is Daisko Noorie, isn't it?
Noorie nodded. One guard remained behind with Noorie while the other moved into the corridors. The guard didn't say anything, but he drilled his attention into Norrie's face. Noorie remained motionless and glanced back. This sort of inspection reminded him of his very recent time back in the capital. After several minutes of utter noiselessness, the second guard returned. The guard gave Noorie a slight bow.
Master Daisko, will you please follow me?
Noorie nodded and followed the man in tow. A long green rug extended down the length of the corridor. Several small rooms with open doors stood along the hallway. Within each of the rooms, older men and women in high-quality silks sat at the smaller desks. Most of them pored over open scrolls and ignored Noorie. One or two did notice him, though. Their expressions sent bemused shivers throughout Norrie's spirit. Their reactions were far less despairing than that of the common rabble. Eventually, the guard came to a large office. An elegant woman sat behind a light brown oak desk. Her black hair had been wrapped in an elegant bun. She wore a sleeveless silk dress that had pinks and oranges melting together. Elaborate tattoos covered both of her arms, from shoulders to wrists. The woman's blue eyes sparkled with a sense of meticulousness, and the organization of her desk reinforced this notion. A small stack of scrolls sat on the surface of her desk. Aside from that, everything else on her desk was arranged perfectly. Madame Howe had a thin frame, and her expensive clothing accentuated her delicate form. A pair of empty chairs sat before her. A pair of double doors opened to a balcony. The rooftops of Jedi stretched just beyond the balcony's railings. A cool breeze blew into the room. Aside from the desk, the rest of the room had been quite austere. Madame Howe glanced up and flinched ever so slightly. She sat up a little straighter.
Are you Daisko Noorie?
I am.
Madame Howe gestured at the guard.
Leave us. Fetch Miss Clara for me.
The guard bowed to Madame Howe and then quickly exited the room. Madame Howe pointed to the chair but said nothing. Noorie set his belongings beside the chair and sat down. The tension from walking up the stairs eased away. She interlaced her fingers and rested her hands on the surface of her desk. Her eyes narrowed slightly.
I was not aware there were any Onistans in the Chutar. Please don't misunderstand my reaction. I'm accepting of all peoples, but...
You didn't expect to see one such as I stroll through your office door.
Madame Howe studied him for a moment.
No, I didn't expect that at all. You are a Chutar, aren't you?
I recently completed my training. Just so I'm clear on the situation, are you and I the only ones aware of Miss Flara's identity?
There are two others who apparently know. They won't be a problem. They're Flara's best friends, so I assume you'll be meeting them very soon.
What can you tell me about Miss Clara? I've only seen her once, when I was first brought to Sienba for my training.
And how long ago was that?
5 years ago. I was 13 at the time. She left shortly after I arrived. Is she anything like her older sisters?
I have no idea how they are. I've never met them. As for Clara, she's very intelligent. She's also extremely shy as well.
When I was briefed on this assignment, I was told that she didn't need protection until recently. You had been the one to bring it to her mother's attention. What caused the change?
Madame Howe rose from her chair and approached the balcony. She gestured for Noorie to follow, so he did. She walked onto the balcony and leaned against the railing. The entirety of Jedi spread out below Noorie. The brilliant azure sky hung overhead. Clouds drifted above the numerous people. The sounds of the city floated on the wind currents.
I mentioned that Clara is shy, but that doesn't mean she isn't bold when she wants to be. As she and her friends have gotten older, they have been experimenting with their magics in more dangerous ways. During a recent experiment, Clara and her friends risked their lives in order to test a very interesting hypothesis.
What happened?
Are you familiar with the term kami?
You mean elemental spirits, right? They make up everything we interact with.
Yes, well, Clara posed the question to her professors about whether or not metal kami attracted lightning. They didn't know, so Clara took it upon herself to conduct her own study.
Noorie resisted the urge to chuckle. The muscles in his face demanded that he allow them to curve up, but he forced them into submission.
That does sound interesting. What happened next?
Clara and her friends waited until a great storm had appeared overhead. She summoned metal kami from a large iron rod she had planted in the ground. When the metal kami appeared, lightning bolts came down from the sky and made them explode.
Were they destroyed?
No, but they were none too happy when they put themselves back together. I dare say they were almost murderous.
So how did Clara and her friends escape that encounter with their lives?
Somehow that girl appeased them with her apology. She's a savant when it comes to understanding and connecting with elemental spirits. Clara's nearly mastered the art of kami summoning. I often wonder what school of magic she'll focus on next.
I'm not sure what help I would be against kami spirits. Is that the most dangerous thing that they've done?
Of course it isn't. Those three are the utter embodiments of chaos, discord, and trouble. Despite them being so reckless, I'm so proud of them. Be that as it may, I was commanded to make sure she was safe at all times. Now that she's blossomed, I can't do that properly and remain headmistress of the university.
A soft voice called out.
Excuse me, headmistress? Are you in here? I was told you summoned me.
There she is now. Let's go meet your new best friend, shall we?
Norrie's stomach swirled for a moment. He ran his thumbs against the insides of his index and middle fingers. Up until this moment, he assumed that being a secret bodyguard was going to be an easy task, where he was often ignored by his master. His spirit trembled. He followed the headmistress back into the office. A young woman stood in the center of the room, just behind the pair of chairs. Long black hair hung freely from her head, and several strands blocked her face. She wore a butter-yellow dress that fell to her knees. A pair of greenish-blue eyes first locked on Madame Howe, but then they drifted over to Noorie. The young woman's shoulders sank a little. Her eyes widened. She brought her arms close to her chest.
Miss Clara, please sit down. I have someone I would like you to meet.
Clara darted her attention from him to Madame Howe for a mere second before she returned it to Noorie. Her voice came out in a squeak.
Okay.
Clara took several awkward steps over to the chairs, all the while watching Noorie. She sat down in the chair furthest from him, which coincidentally rested beside all of his belongings. Madame Howe took her place behind the desk and then waved her hand at the last remaining chair.
Please come and join us, Mr. Noorie.
Clara tried to scoot her chair further away as Noorie took a seat. When her chair legs hit Norrie's bags, she glanced down.
Oh dear. Is this your stuff?
She swallowed hard, but kept her eyes averted from Norrie's.
Is this your chair? I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know I took your chair.
It's quite all right, Miss Clara.
Clara placed her small hands in her lap. She tried smoothing the front of her dress, even though it looked perfectly flat. When she couldn't flatten it anymore, she began fumbling with her fingers. Though she still appeared small compared to him, Noorie suspected she stood taller than many of the other lowlander females.
Miss Clara, this is Mr. Daisko Noorie. He's here from Xianba.
Clara peeked out from under her hair, but then averted her eyes again. Her words came out in a low mumble.
It's nice to meet you, Mr. Noorie.
Noorie kept his hands in front of him, right in his lap.
I'm sorry. I didn't quite get that. What did you say, ma'am?
Clara quivered a little more, and she turned around in her chair to better face him. She met his gaze, but her irises wavered. This time, her voice carried a little more volume.
It's nice to meet you, Mr. Noorie. What brings you to Jedi?
I'm here for you, ma'am.
Flair's eyes got wider, and she sank deeper into her chair.
For me? Why are you here for me?
He's a Chutar. He's here to protect you.
A tutor?
A deep frown etched itself on her face.
This is because I conducted that experiment, isn't it?
I'm afraid so, but there were other things that had built up the need for you to have greater protection.
How am I going to keep my identity a secret if he's following me around everywhere?
She turned to Noorie.
No offense, but I don't want you here. I just want to be a normal person, like everyone else.
A cold spasm trembled in Norrie's chest. He averted his eyes.
I'm a Chutar, ma'am. I've been trained to protect people without being obtrusive. You won't have to talk to me, or even acknowledge me. Please allow me to do my job.
It'll look suspicious if I have a towering bodyguard following me.
If anyone asks, I'll tell them I've been hired by your silk merchant parents. I promise you'll have your privacy. I won't be towering over you all the time, just shadowing you to make sure nothing bad happens to you.
For a long moment, Flair remained still. Her eyes fell downcast, and she brought her arms close to her body.
I don't have a choice, do I?
No, ma'am. Your mother's wishes were perfectly explained.
This doesn't have to be unpleasant, Miss Flera. It's for your own protection.
I know. May I please be excused and be allowed to return to class? I'm missing a fascinating lesson on Earth commie physiology.
Of course, dear. Noorie has to settle in his room anyway. He'll meet up with you later.
Flair stood up but didn't move toward the door.
Are you going to carry that giant weapon around with you as you follow me?
Yes, I intend to.
Flair let out a sigh, and then she exited the room with considerable haste.
That poor girl. All she wants to do is read books and be normal. I'm sure you can sympathize with how she feels.
Why do you say that? I don't desire to be something I'm not. I'm proud to be an Onistan.
I know that. I mean, I'm sure you understand how it feels to be uncomfortable in your environment.
I wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable if people in general didn't place so much emphasis on race.
Noorie stood up and grabbed his things.
I'd really like to be shown to my room now.
Of course.
She yelled for one of the guards to enter the room. After a brief moment, a female guard entered. Madame Howe nodded to her.
Show Mr. Noorie to the accommodations we have prepared for him. I hope you don't mind that I put you right beside Flara's room. That should make your job easier.
Noorie followed the guard out of the room and down the stairs. His room was fairly nice considering it had been designed for a lowlander. The top of Norrie's head almost grazed the ceiling. A bed also meant for a lowlander rested against the wall. A doorway in the room opened up to a smaller room with a large tub in it. There was a small table that stood by the tub, and a pair of medium-sized buckets filled with water rested on the table. Noorie would have to get more buckets. He put his bags on the bed and began to unload them. One of the bags contained his battle armor breastplate, gloves and greaves, shoulder and wrist pads, and his battle sandals. Noorie stacked his Chutar armor against the wall in a nice little row. In the other bag, Noorie pulled out an assortment of comfortable cotton garments. Rather than wear his current outfit, Noorie changed into a pair of comfortable slacks, a long-sleeve shirt, and a pair of sandals. Noorie gently placed his loot case on the bed and opened it. His face scrunched up.
Idiot! Why didn't you suggest using the Wandering Lute Player as your cover? That would have made things a little easier.
Noorie closed the case and put the case on his shoulder. He carried the Tetsubo in his other hand and rested it on his other shoulder. As he left the bedroom, the Wandering Lute Player notion grew more prevalent. A grin curled on his face, and he made his way to the stairwell. At the moment, the hallways were barren and full of solitude. He traipsed into the grand foyer and took a seat by the wall beside the front doors. Noorie set the Tetsubo beside him and then opened the loot case. He gripped the neck of the lute gently as if it were a lever. His enormous fingers strummed across the strings and created several soft notes. The notes resonated in the expanse of the foyer and vibrated through the halls. Noorie continued to waggle his fingers against the strings, going up and down the musical scales. A slow but steady momentum of warmth built up in his spirit. Noorie closed his eyes in ecstasy as the notes blended together to form familiar melodies. A profound smile had forced itself upon his face, and for once, Noorie allowed it to remain. Noorie stopped and drew in a great breath before he played the lute for real. The first song he played was one that his mother had taught him long ago. The winding crescendos and heartwarming refrains filtered through the corridors and drew Noorie back in time through his memory. At first, Noorie sat alone in the foyer, but then a young man stumbled into the open expanse. The young man stared at Noorie with the imaginative wonder that a child might have at the onset of a great festival. He disappeared, but returned a few moments later with at least a half-dozen friends. Norrie's fingers continued to dance across the strings. When one song ended, he immediately went into another. More students collected around him. No one whispered, no one beamed terrified or distasteful expressions at him. For a brief moment, they didn't see him, they only heard the music. Several mage students nodded their heads in time with the notes. Others stared dreamily at Noorie, perhaps unable to fathom how such a brutish fellow could produce such wonders. His heart jumped within his chest. Flare strolled down the stairs alongside a pair of women. Of the three, Flare was the tallest. One of her companions had long, dark brown hair. She glared at Noorie with utter detest and whispered something to Flare. The second woman had short blonde hair, and rather than scowl, she smiled. Flare kept her distance at the back of the crowd, but she watched him in utter amazement. Noorie finished his song and stopped. Students clapped, and several of them even skipped over to his open loot case to toss coins in. One student in particular stormed over. Her fists were balled and her lips were squished together to form a wrinkled upside-down U between her cheeks. This student wasn't either of Flare's companions. She gave him a stare almost as intense as Flare's brown-haired friend. The female student wore a light blue dress with star patterns lining the bottom edge of her dress. She had light blonde-colored hair and slightly violet eyes. The woman pointed a slender finger at Norrie's face.
This is a place of learning. This isn't a place for you to earn food money. Move along, beggar.
Noorie placed his lute down and stood up. As Noorie towered over her, the bravado of the woman evaporated. A collective gasp emerged from the crowd. The illusion of the music had faded, and now the students saw Noorie for what he was. Despite the crowd's apprehension, Noorie puffed out his chest and adopted a dramatic pose.
I'm not a beggar. I'm a wandering minstrel. I've been given permission to play here anywhere I want. My name is Noorie the Fabulous.
The female student pointed and asked,
If you're a minstrel, then how do you explain that?
Noorie glanced to what she pointed at.
My war club? Well, that's to defend myself against river pirates and people who would try and rob me.
The crowd started to murmur amongst themselves. Flare's companions whispered to one another. Suddenly, the blonde-haired companion stepped out in front of the crowd. Of the three, she was the shortest of the group. The blonde wore a light orange dress that had 2 slits running up the sides. An intricate tattoo of a great tree covered her right thigh.
That was a really pretty song. Play another one!
Several of the other students in the crowd agreed. Smiles covered many of their faces. Flare and the dark-haired companion didn't share their excitement. They watched him with an intense stare. Chills whirled throughout Norrie's body like a whirlwind. Noorie bent down and gently gripped his lute.
If the crowd wishes it, then I'll play.
He sat back down and strummed on the strings. Once more, the foyer became filled with beautiful lute music. People bobbed their heads along with the well-played notes, but Flare and her dark-haired companion moved through the crowd. He watched them, and never once did their eyes break apart from his. Noorie didn't turn his head, though, and they disappeared through the front door of the university moments later. Slowly, he drifted his attention back to the blonde. She had remained where she stood. A proud, victorious grin covered her round face. The woman had a stocky build, no doubt achieved through years of physical labor. In Norrie's experiences, most lowlanders lacked that body type. More students maneuvered up to his lute case and threw coins in. When he finished his second song, Noorie placed his lute down.
That's all for now, but I'll be back. Thank you for your patronage.
A few grumbles murmured through the crowd, but for the most part, the students started to walk away. The blonde-haired woman stayed where she stood, but she crossed her arms over her chest. Noorie collected the many coins that had accumulated in his case, and then he placed the instrument where it belonged. By the time he managed to close his lute case, the blonde-haired woman strolled up to him.
You play that thing pretty good. Not what I was expecting at all.
That was a nice trick you pulled there.
I don't play tricks. I really wanted to hear you play more. What my friends do is their business. My name's Paitia Pisa. And you are?
Daisko Noorie. So, are you one of Miss Flara's two best friends?
Apisa placed her hands on her hips.
As sure as the day is long.
Then, do you know why I'm here?
Flare may have mentioned it. No offense, but you're not needed here. You may have some fancy training, but Reiko and I are plenty capable of keeping an eye on her.
Her mother seems to think differently. Are you going to prevent me from doing my job?
Now, don't be all sour, Mr. Noorie. No one's going to stop you from doing what you're supposed to do. I just wanted to let you know you're unneeded. We have magic, and you have a big club.
Noorie reached down and collected his things.
Will you please take me to where Miss Flara scampered off to?
Well, at least your mother taught you manners. I'd love to take you to Flara. Follow me, big guy.
Apisa walked out through the entrance, but then stopped and glanced over her shoulder to make sure Noorie followed her. He trailed her steps, and they entered the throng of the crowd. Tove ducked under the large woman's war club. The savage gusts that trailed the weapon made the hairs on the back of his neck stand erect. His muscles ached, his lungs strained at trying to keep from her landing a death blow. The woman wasn't like the other Onistans that Tove had cut down. He slashed at her torso, but he only added to the collection of grooves he had already engraved on the front of her armor. The woman's tetsubo whirled around for another strike, and Tove leapt back out of the way. This time, the wind made his eyes flutter. She towered over him, though she was not as large as Gaejok or any of the other Oni. The armor she wore was made from master craftsmanship, and perhaps enhanced with magic. The woman gripped her war club tightly, prepared to advance on him.
How does it feel to know your people are being slaughtered as we speak? Your mongrel children are being rounded up. They will be eaten by the Oni.
The woman roared and leapt at him. Tove rolled under her blow and stood back up on the other side of the room.
It's what your filthy people deserve.
The woman turned and pointed her tetsubo at him.
I don't know what you are exactly, you vile yokai, but you'll die soon enough. Before I leave this world, I'll crush your skull beneath my sandal.
I'm no yokai, but it doesn't matter.
Tove waved his energy sword in front of him.
Your people are finished. Even if I were to die at your hand, no one in this forsaken world can stop what's going to come. A reckoning is upon us.
The woman stepped forward.
Though Onista falls, the Empire will endure. We've slain much of your pathetic Oni army. They will never overtake the Lowlanders.
You think your pathetic empire only has Oni to worry about? If it were only that, then you'd be right. Onista falls today, and tomorrow, the rest of humanity. My masters will return.
And who are your masters?
The unmistakable outline of an Oni appeared just outside the window. Tove's throat tightened up. He pointed his sword at her and yelled out,
My masters are the rightful rulers of this land. They are the gods and goddesses who your people betrayed 1,000 years ago. Take heart that you won't be alive to witness their vengeance.
A brief moment of unease covered the woman's face. The wall crumbled behind her. Large Oni hands reached into the room. The woman tried to smack the hands, but Tove drove his sword into her ribcage, between the strings that held the back and front of her armor together. In a fleeting moment of strength, the woman backhanded Tove. He fell to the floor, but he watched as the Oni picked up the woman.
Noorie!
Tove winced as the woman came apart in massive clumps. With the leader of the city militia dead, Onista would soon fall. His energy sword dissipated into nothingness, and his wings appeared. Tove flew high into the air and gazed over the broken visage of the city. People screamed. Oni feasted, blood covered much of the streets. Tove closed his eyes. Images of his daughter appeared before him. Chapter 2. The crowd split open as Apisa and Noorie walked down the street. Apisa ignored the people in the crowd, much in the same way that they forgot she even existed. The hum of life came to a screeching halt as Noorie moved through the throngs of people. And yet, Apisa didn't seem to notice or care. Noorie increased his speed and walked right beside her. At first, he just glanced at her from the corner of his eye. However, the longer he walked, the more he started to study her face. Her skin had a darker complexion to it, perhaps earned through hard labor in the sun. Apisa tilted her head up at him.
Something you want to say, big guy? I'm not a tiger. I won't bite or scratch you.
A small grin appeared on her face.
So, Miss Clara already mentioned me to you and your other friend.
Sort of. The other friend is named Reiko, by the way. Clara said that some big monster-looking guy had to follow her from now on. She's not too happy about it. I don't really like that you're making my friends sad.
I'm not trying to make anyone sad. I'm just trying to do my duty.
That's mighty fine and all, but that still doesn't change the fact that you're not needed or wanted. No offense.
I'm used to it. I'm here though, so let's make the best of it.
I'm not the one you're going to have a problem with. I'm not talking about Clara either.
Noorie turned his attention to the sky above him. The bright sun peeked through the clouds and blinded him for a moment. A soft, warm breeze soared down the street. It kissed his skin.
Nice day, isn't it?
So we're doing small talk, are we? I thought you didn't like me.
An amused expression covered her face.
I never said I didn't like you. I said you were unneeded. Just because you're like a thorn in our sides doesn't mean I can't be nice to you. I like making those around me feel welcome.
Yes, you made me feel quite welcome.
Well, good.
Apisa took in a deep breath and grinned even wider.
I love beautiful days like this. It's almost harvest time where I'm from. Right about now, my family will be preparing to pull up a whole heap of rice.
So you're a farmer. That would explain the body.
Suddenly, the warmth in her demeanor melted away.
And what the hell is that supposed to mean? Were you ogling at me?
She stopped in place and glared at him. Several of the other citizens around Noorie winced and moved faster away from him. The center of Norrie's chest vibrated with an electric tingle.
I wasn't ogling you. I just noticed...
You noticed what?
He studied her for a moment. Her feet had been planted under her shoulders. Apisa's hands had formed tight fists. A distinct rage had formed in the green of her eyes.
I noticed that, you're quite strong. You remind me of the women back where I'm from. They were all powerful and hardy.
You're saying I look powerful and hardy?
Yeah.
Apisa's stiff body relaxed a little.
Oh, why thank you.
She started walking again, but stopped after about 10 feet.
Are you coming or what?
Noorie caught up with her again. Any sign of her previous discontent had vanished. She didn't say anything, but strolled forward through the crowds. The people around them were thankfully becoming less and less surprised by Norrie's presence. They still made way for both he and Apisa, but that made things a little bit easier.
So I was told that Clara can summon Kami. You're a mage student too, right?
A smirk formed between Apisa's cheeks.
I sure am. That's what this little beauty represents.
She pointed to the elaborate pink-inked tattoo on her thigh. Several small pieces of fruit hung from the tree branches. The actual tree and the fruit themselves were composed of tiny individualized runes that made up the outlines of the shapes.
So are you good at growing plants or something?
Plants? Why no, silly. I'm sure it may look like that to someone not studying magic. My specialty is self-augmentation. It's a mouthful, but it means I can change my body in different ways.
Change your body? How so?
I'll give you an example. If I wanted to, I could become stronger than you are.
You don't know anything about me or my people. If you did, you would know it's foolish to challenge an Oni stand to a feat of strength.
Once more, Apisa stopped.
Is that so? Well, I'll take your challenge, Mr. I don't know anything about magic. When we get to Clara, you and I are going to have a little competition.
Where are we going anyway?
It's not far, just a couple more blocks away, I reckon. I should warn you, Reiko will probably be really mean to you.
I'm used to it. Everyone's mean to Oni stands.
People from Buka aren't.
Apisa pressed her thumb into the center of her chest.
We don't care who people are. So long as they're hard workers, we like them. Then again, I've never actually seen a real-life Oniston before. Why do people hate your people so much?
Very few Onistans actually leave home and go out into the world. Those who willingly leave typically pursue lives of banditry and villainy. I've come to find out that there have been several infamous Onistans that have perpetuated the Onistan stereotype.
I don't know anything about the stereotypes of your people. What are they?
Noorie peered down at her. Apisa was no bigger than an Onistan child.
Most of you lowlanders think we're big, stupid, and probably not even human.
You look plenty human to me. Just big. So if most of your people don't leave Onista, why did you?
Noorie narrowed his eyes. His jaw tightened.
I didn't have a choice.
And what's that mean?
Noorie increased his pace.
Let's get to this place already. I'm tired of talking about this.
Apisa led him past the great horse fountain Noorie passed earlier. They moved across the plaza toward the right street. Children still ran about and played imaginative games while their parents conversed at smaller tables. A few children stopped their games and gaped at Noorie.
Oh, wow! He's so big! I hope I'm that big when I grow up.
He looks like a giant! I wonder if he likes to play games!
One of the taller girls ran up to him.
Hey you! Do you want to come play with us? We can pretend you're a giant. You have to come get us, okay?
Several of the adults started to move up toward their children. Apisa stepped out in front of Noorie and placed her hands on her hips.
Well, aren't you all just the cutest? My pickle friend would love to play with you all, but we have to go meet some of my friends. He's a wandering minstrel and can play music for you later, if you're good and you mind your parents.
Many of the children's faces lit up, although the parents seemed less excited. Apisa grabbed Noorie's arm and they started walking again. Though Apisa's skin felt a little rough, it was much softer than his own. 100 butterflies opened up in his gut. They disappeared seconds after Apisa let go of his arm. Noorie averted his eyes, and the sensation dissipated like a morning fog. They walked down the road, and neither Apisa nor Noorie said anything to one another. People filed in and out of residential buildings. More children ran around the streets, and they gazed up at him with the same sense of eager intrigue that the children at the fountain did. Parents grabbed their children and watched Noorie pass by. Despite their apparent apprehension, a great deal of vitality existed in the cluster of homes. Several delicate smells filled the air, and not all of it originated from food. Merchants had large carts along the road, and they waved their oils and lotions about. Flowers sat in various pots on numerous carts. The merchants even flagged down Noorie and tried to coax him to buy something. After passing through 3 street intersections, Noorie and Apisa came to a little tea shop. A small sign that read, "The White Pearl," hung over the shop's front door.
This is where we part ways. I was given specific instructions to lead you to us, but Clara wants her privacy. So do we.
Very well. I'll set up across the street and play.
He turned to walk across the street. By the time that he sat down beside the side of a building, Apisa had already moved inside. He opened the loot case, but before he could bring out his instrument, Apisa had returned. She carried a small table in her hands, and Clara and Reiko followed her with a pair of chairs. Other patrons from within the tea shop came out too. They all studied Noorie with appraising expressions. Apisa set the table in front of Noorie.
Don't think for a minute I forgot about the challenge. I mean to prove you as the weaker person.
Reiko set a chair on Apisa's side of the table. Her long brown hair had been styled so it fell back behind her. Reiko wore makeup and lipstick, and her fingernails had been painted purple. Her sleeveless vest and slacks matched the color of her painted nails. She stood slightly taller than Apisa, but not quite as tall as Clara. Pure and simple, Reiko was gorgeous. Reiko had a tattoo on her left arm, but Noorie couldn't make out what it was without appearing awkward. She patted Apisa on the back.
Show this mountain trash what real strength is, darling. After that, come back inside for tea. I have the most delightful gossip to tell you.
Apisa grinned at her.
You're not going to watch me whoop his butt?
I have better things to do than watch you defeat a beast in a meaningless competition. I wish you great fortune, though.
As Reiko turned back to the tea shop, she cast a dark glare at Noorie. Noorie stood up, and Clara brought him over a chair. She averted her eyes and spoke in a whisper.
You can sit on this.
As soon as Noorie took the chair, Clara maneuvered back around the table and stood beside Apisa. Apisa sat down and placed her elbow on the table. A bright pink flash appeared on her right side. Her tree tattoo glowed brightly like a torch.
Come on, let's arm wrestle.
Noorie placed his arm on the table and gripped her hand. Noorie exited the university water dispensary with 2 large buckets filled with water. He took careful steps as to not spill any of the precious water. Flair would still be in class for the next hour, so he had plenty of time to prepare for his day. The last few days had been the same routine over and over. Flair and her friends would go to class, and then they would go into Jedi to eat somewhere. After they ate, the girls would wander around to various places. Sometime before sunset, they would return to their dorms. Yesterday, Apisa had finally greeted him somewhat warmly again. After he had beaten her in the arm wrestle, she took a neglectful stance toward him. Reiko glared at him every once in a while. Flair pretended that he wasn't even there. Of all 3 interactions, Noorie preferred Flair's. Noorie had become accustomed to getting outright hatred directed at him, but Apisa treated him like a sick, homeless dog that needed sympathy or kindness. Noorie entered his room and reached for the small sack of coins that rested on the top of his dresser. Pretending to be a minstrel had paid off. People graced him with their fortunes. He didn't need it, but it felt nice for people to at least honor him for something other than his muscle. He got dressed in comfortable clothing, grabbed his loot case, and then clutched his tetsubo. As he had in days prior, Noorie positioned himself at the front of the university entrance. More than once, Madame Hal came down to listen to his music. When Flair and her friends left the university, Noorie followed them, but at a distance. Today had been exceptionally warm, a little too warm for his tastes. His homeland called out to him through his memory. Cool winds would caress his skin from every direction. Sweet mountain air would fill his lungs. Gigantic peaks would stretch into the sky. Nothing in the lowlands created that same sense of peace that his home did. Noorie had just started playing his 3rd song outside the tea house when a woman ran down the street. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Her body heaved frantically. She ran to the tea shop door and opened it. Immediately, Noorie placed his loot into the case and closed it. Within less than a minute, he moved across the street. Up until that point, he had never set foot inside the tea shop. The sweet smell of incense wrapped around him as soon as the door closed behind him. Curtains had been lowered in front of the windows. Darkness filled the interior of the tea house, but numerous lanterns forced the shadows away. A dozen patrons sat at various tables, but they watched one table in particular. The woman who had entered the tea shop sat beside Reiko across from Clara and Apisa. Reiko had her arm wrapped around the woman's shoulders. Slowly, Reiko rocked the woman back and forth. Her usual scorn-fueled sneer had been transformed into a mask of compassion. As Noorie got closer, he noticed Reiko's tattoo, an elaborate chromatic tattoo of a diamond with little gems around it stretched down her left arm. Clara and Apisa spoke in hushed tones to the woman while Reiko simply rubbed her back in smaller circles. The woman wore a light green long-sleeved jacket and some slacks. Her brown hair had streaks of gray in it. Noorie stepped up to the table, and Reiko glared at him.
Oh, what in heaven's name do you want? Can't you see we're dealing with something here? Away with you before you infect us with stupid.
The woman stared up at Noorie.
Who's he?
Reiko gently took hold of the woman's face and turned her head away from Noorie.
He's no one, darling. Just a poor beggar minstrel who needs to leave us alone. Right now.
Clara and Apisa glanced back at one another, but neither one said anything. Noorie knelt down beside the woman.
Enough of your pretentious crap. If there's something going on, then perhaps I can help.
Watch your filthy mouth, you disgusting brute! Can't you see she's terribly distressed?
But why is she distressed?
The woman switched her attention from Reiko to Clara and Apisa. Her voice resonated with tremors.
Who is this guy? Is there actually a chance he can help?
He's my bodyguard. I'm not sure how much help he can be.
The woman turned to Noorie and studied him for a moment.
You have a weapon. Are you a warrior?
I am, but I'm more than a mere warrior. Can you please tell me what's going on?
The woman glanced over at Clara and Apisa. Apisa gave her a slight nod, and Clara kept staring at the flat of the table. The woman peered over at Reiko. Reiko rolled her eyes, but kept caressing the woman's back.
You might as well tell him he won't leave us alone until he sates his curiosity, even if it is inextricably inconsiderate.
The woman whirled around and gazed into Norrie's eyes.
My name is Dr. Kausisti, and my husband was abducted by the Kluflu clan. They're going to kill him.
The Kluflu clan?
Apisa maneuvered around so she could whisper into Norrie's ear.
They're one of the few organized crime factions we have in Jedi.
Clara grabbed Dr. Kausisti's hands in hers.
What were you doing that got you mixed up with them?
Dr. Kausisti's shoulders slumped.
It wasn't our fault. We never wanted anything to do with them. They came to us. We didn't know who we were dealing with until it was too late.
So where can I find this Kluflu clan?
Dr. Kausisti frowned at him.
Find them? Are you intending on going after them?
Noorie placed his loot case on the table in front of Dr. Kausisti.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time. If what you're saying is true, then we have to get in there, now. Do you know where their base is?
Reiko, Apisa, and Flare all gazed at one another but remained quiet. The woman took several deep breaths before she explained where the Kluflu clan base was. Noorie rested his hand on his loot case.
I'll leave this in your care until I get back with your husband. Please take care of it. My father gave it to me.
Reiko stood up and held up her hand.
You can't be serious. Surely even you can't be stupid enough to think you're going to just march into that criminal stronghold without anything happening to you.
Noorie gave her a grim grin.
Oh, something's going to happen. I'll be back with her husband alive, or I won't be coming back at all.
Flare gasped as Noorie rose up. He whirled around and left the tea shop. His grip on his Tetsubo tightened. The blood in his veins zipped along with the speed of the wind. His legs pumped furiously as he moved through the crowd. Due to his haste, people leapt out of his way. A soft hand grabbed his arm. Noorie stopped and glanced back over his shoulder. Apisa, Reiko, and Flare had followed him into the street.
Wait, you can't go alone. We're coming with you.
You? But what can you do?
Reiko stepped forward and poked him in the chest. Her deep blue eyes reflected a sense of passion.
You listen here, you big, dumb brute. We have magic, and you only have that big club. If anything, you're the one who's ill-equipped to handle this situation.
Noorie inched his face closer to hers.
You don't know anything about me, or what I can do.
Flare stepped forward. She fumbled with her fingers.
You don't know what we can do either. We're not weak. And besides, Dr. Kausisti is our friend.
Noorie regarded each of them closely.
I suppose we all have something to prove to one another then, don't we?
Apisa lightly punched him in the arm.
Don't think this is going to be like the arm wrestling match. I'm going to win out this time.
Reiko shot both Noorie and Apisa dark glares.
This isn't a game. An innocent man's life hangs in the balance. Let's go.
Reiko took the lead and moved down the street with even more haste than what Noorie had been using. Flare chased after her.
Well, we don't want to be left behind, do we?
Noorie followed after them. His warrior spirit ignited, his senses sharpened. The grip on his war club tightened again. In the midst of all that, a small degree of excitement also blossomed. Tove eased his back against the wall and held his breath. Silence lingered around everywhere, and it was deceiving. Slowly, Tove examined his surroundings. Dark stone and marble spanned the beautiful floors. The ceilings hung above him 30 feet overhead, and the skylights allowed for sunlight to filter into the grand corridors. Wonderfully calming scents danced on the air. Tove's stomach turned. How could this place be so extravagant when in the streets outside, people starved? That didn't matter now. All that mattered was that Tove didn't get caught. In the hustle and bustle of the midday shift change, the Imperial Guards had been careless for only a few moments. To Tove's great fortune, he managed to slip in. Now that he was in, he was stuck. As good as he was, if Tove was discovered, everything his masters planned for would have been for naught. Tove peeked around the corner. The long corridors went on forever and had countless rooms attached to each one. How was he going to find the one room he needed in this maze of decadence? Something moved at the far end of the hallway. A pair of guards exited a room, and they moved away without looking in his direction. When everything returned to a state of utter quiet, Tove slipped out and took cautious steps. Every time he heard a distant echo, he stopped where he stood and crept beside the closest wall. Once he felt safer, he resumed his trek. The room he sought was right across from a statue of a duck. Why in the hell would these stupid humans have a statue of a duck in the palace anyway? The minutes melted away as Tove casually crept along the corridors. Eventually, he found the statue of the duck. Without pausing, Tove gently pushed open the door across from it and moved inside. Darkness filled the room, with only several beams of light entering through the breaks from the curtains blocking the windows. A large canopy bed sat in the middle of the chamber. Several large couches lined the walls. As he had been informed, the doorway leading to a balcony stood across from where he had entered. Tove moved over to one of the couches and sat down. The room was utterly still. Tove touched his armband. It had been constructed from gold and had an oval yellow gem embedded within it. Slowly, Tove channeled his magic into the stone. It glowed with a faint hue and casted oblong shadows on the wall. Tove sent his thoughts into it and imagined a specific person.
Meet me. I have news for you.
Tove rested his hands in his lap. He kept glancing at both doors. Several minutes later, the door to the room opened up. A young woman with black hair entered the room. She wore an elegant white dress with various luxurious adornments woven into the fabric. When considering the majority of the human women, she was taller than most. She narrowed her magenta-colored eyes.
What are you doing here?
Rather than stand, the woman moved over to an adjacent couch and poised herself on it as if it were a throne. Tove eased back into a seat. The softness of the cushion felt great against his weary back muscles. A sense of comfort sent vile spasms reverberating through his torso.
Do you think I want to be here? I loathe the level of decadence your kind squanders. Do you know how many of your own kind sleeps on the streets every night? It sickens me.
The woman crossed her arms over her chest.
I'm on your side. Why do you think I'm serving the masters? I want balance too.
That's your only redeeming quality, human.
You know my name, creature.
I don't care to use it. If you've read the lore, then you know what I am. If you were half the devotee you claim to be, I think you'd be giving me more respect.
I am being respectful. You need me, and the Celestial Ones can't succeed without agents like myself. Respect goes both ways.
Tove reached into a side pouch and pulled out a slender scroll.
Onista has fallen. It's now time for you to fulfill your part of the plan.
The ogres are truly vanquished?
Tove leaned forward in his seat. A satisfied grin split apart his face.
I'm the one who led the charge against them. What have you done for the masters lately?
She looked at the door, and then turned her attention back to him.
I keep them informed. I risk my life every day for them. Don't you dare for a moment discount my sacrifices.
Tove tossed her the scroll.
Your sacrifices have not been forgotten, even by me. Can you blame me for hating your kind?
A long moment of silence lingered in the room before the woman's shoulders slumped.
I'm not like my ancestors. I'm not like the others. I support you, and I support the Celestial Ones.
Tove advanced for the second door.
Good. They're going to ask you to do something very difficult. I hope you're ready.
The woman regarded him for a moment before she unrolled the scroll. She studied its contents, and then winced.
I suspected they would ask this of me. When should I do it?
Not yet. Just be aware. You'll be required to perform the act very soon. Within the month, no doubt. What you can do now is destroy all records containing lore about them.
I understand. It shall be done before the week's end.
Tove opened the door. A gentle breeze caressed him. The azure sky stretched overhead.
Be careful, human. I may hate your kind, but you have done well in the many years you have served the masters. You are indeed highly valued.
I should hope so. After all, I've been promised so much for what I've given and what I intend to give.
The end is coming. Be ready.
He summoned his wings and flew off.
There it is. the Clue clan base.
For the last few blocks, the number of residential buildings had dropped considerably. An army of warehouses and various factories swarmed the roadsides. Odd non-food related odors permeated the air. Consistent, distant, muffled noise resounded like thunder. The only people who moved on the streets were factory or warehouse workers. Whenever someone got close to Noorie, they averted their gaze and increased their pace. None of the girls mentioned anything. A large 2-story house sat in the middle of a ring of walls. The walls had been painted white, which matched the building. A brown tiled roof sat atop the structure. 2 warehouses crowded the outer walls of the complex. A pair of men stood in front of the large circular opening in the wall. They both wore silk long-sleeved jackets and baggy slacks. One of the men had a shoddy spear in his hands, while the other had a worn-looking hatchet hanging from his belt. They spoke in hushed tones, but laughed gruffly. In terms of age, they appeared to be slightly older than Noorie. Both of the men could have benefited from a good shave. Noorie gripped his war club in both hands.
I can probably get up to them and take them out before they could raise too much of a commotion.
You'll do nothing of the sort, you savage ruffian. Allow me to take care of the guards. I'll do this with sophistication and grace.
She flourished her hands for a moment and stepped out in front of the others. Reiko closed her eyes. Her rainbow diamond tattoo glowed brilliantly for a moment. The air rippled with unseen energies, and it felt thicker against Norrie's skin. Out of nothing, several figures emerged into being, as if they had merely stepped out of the shadows. Each of the women had incredibly elegant silk robes clinging to their lithe forms. The silk hugged their bodies a little too well, for each and every perfect curve or bump pressed through the thin fabric. The women wore delicately applied makeup that accentuated the slant of their eyes and the prominence of their cheekbones. Crimson lips formed subtle pouts. Their finger and toenails had the same color as their lips. Lastly, each of the women wore sandals on their feet. Norrie's cheeks burned wildly. The 3 women stood poised for only a moment before they walked around the corner and moved toward the guards.
Wait! It's dangerous for them to go out there. Those men could hurt them.
Reiko rolled her eyes and shook her head. Apisa openly chuckled, and even Clara smirked behind the hand that she had raised to her mouth. Noorie just watched the trio of women. They pranced up to the pair of guards as if out of a dream. The guards stiffened upon their approach. Reiko's tattoo continued to faintly shimmer, and she stared intently at the women as well. After several long seconds, the women scampered away from the guards. The pair of men chased after them instantly.
How delightful. They'll be busy for a while. We can go inside now.
Whoa, wait a second. What about those women? We can't just leave them.
Reiko placed her hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes at him. Her upper lip quivered into a feral snarl.
That was an illusion, you simple-minded fellow. That's what I do, after all. I'm an illusionist. Not only that, I'm the most skilled illusionist in all of Jedi. None can match my prowess.
Reiko beheld him as if he were a lowly kitchen slave, and then maneuvered around the corner. Flare didn't hesitate to follow Reiko. Apisa paused for a moment and whispered ever so slightly.
I told you Flare wasn't the one for you to worry about.
Noorie tightened his jaw so that his lower molars pressed up against his upper ones. His grip on his tetsubo had become so great that his knuckles shook slightly. Noorie followed behind them and scanned the area for anything that he could smash. Reiko and Flare moved into the circular opening in the wall first. Norrie's heart lurched upward closer to his collarbones. He ran faster and managed to enter the inner garden as Reiko made her way to the front door. The interior garden appeared quite serene. A gravel path ran between 2 fairly large koi ponds. Fish shapes swirled beneath the water's surface while lily pads floated above them. Trees with white and pink blossoms growing on their branches surrounded the fish ponds. A wide wooden deck surrounded the perimeter of the house. Reiko and Flare stopped in front of the wooden double doors.
Should we go in through the front?
Noorie stepped up onto the porch and positioned himself between them. He gazed down at Flare and completely blocked Reiko from view.
Get your diseased, filthy posterior out of my face, you wretched creature.
Noorie narrowed his eyes and kept his voice as gruff and authoritative as he could.
If we're going to do this, we're going to do it my way. I'm the one trained in combat and guardianship. We should try and find a side entrance or something. And I'm going first in case something happens, okay?
Flare shrank before him ever so slightly and averted her eyes.
Okay.
Noorie whirled around, but made sure not to knock Reiko over in the process. Her demonic stare of disapproval haunted him from his peripheral vision. Noorie lowered his stance and moved his feet slowly along the floorboards. When one foot moved forward, Noorie planted all of his weight on the other leg. Gently, he eased his front foot onto the floor and then transferred his full weight onto it. Noorie swung his back leg forward and repeated the process as he moved about. The girls copied his movements, which made their group look more like a trio of young girls mimicking their older brother, or perhaps their father due to Norrie's exceptional size. Thank the light that despite their silly appearance, they didn't make any noise. The deck zigzagged along the side of the house, but it stopped at a side entrance on the right side of the building. Noorie held up his hand and gazed over his shoulder to see if the girls would indeed halt. Reiko and Apisa had grins, while Clara had an impish smirk plastered on her face. When they noticed that he had his attention on them, they softly snickered into their hands. So they were making fun of him. Great. Just great. Noorie leaned in and pressed his ear to the door. Nothing. He gently placed his hand on the wooden frame of the door and slid it to either side. The door moved more so in one direction, so Noorie opened it cautiously. As he did, he peeked inside. A narrow hallway ran about 20 feet before it came to an intersection. Noorie swallowed to moisten his throat. He gestured back to the women and slowly entered inside. Silence filled the house. Entryways to rooms opened up from the hallway every 5 or 10 feet. Unmade bedrolls and furniture sat in the rooms. Noorie stopped at the corner of the intersection and glanced back to Clara and the others. His voice came out in a harsh whisper.
You do realize this is probably going to end in bloodshed, right?
Clara's shoulders bunched up a little and she winced. Tears formed in her eyelids, but she nodded.
I'm more than ready to do some blood spilling, if it's needed.
Blood spilling is so barbaric. I'll do what needs to be done, but I won't be the reason anyone loses their life.
Noorie turned back around and stared down the hallway. Just as he was about to move out from the safety of his spot, the front door started to move. Anxiety spasms erupted within him as he placed his back against the wall. He locked his gaze on the front door, but he wildly waved at the girls with his free hand. The girls ducked into one of the rooms. Once they were completely within, Noorie took several stealthy steps to join them. Noorie crouched closest to the doorway and held his tetsubo at the ready. Though none of the girls said anything, the air vibrated with their combined sense of panic. Noorie pressed his tongue against the roof of his mouth. Over a dozen heavy feet trumped up the hallway. A whiny voice broke the uneasy silence.
The boss will be here soon. Is that bastard ready?
Yeah, we beat him up pretty good when we brought him in. He should still be chained downstairs.
I'm going upstairs to fetch the boss's favorite sword. He told me he wants to cut that bastard's head off and send it back to his bitch of a wife before sundown. You guys go downstairs and beat him some more. Make his last moments of life painful.
Noorie looked back at the others. Clara's eyes had widened and Reiko wrapped an arm around her. Her snide contempt had retreated back behind a mask of concern. Apisa probably shared Norrie's own expression. Rage poured from her like a river. Norrie's heart banged like an Onistan festival drum. With each pound, the blood in his veins grew hotter. He stood up and gazed down into Clara's eyes. After a brief second, Noorie stepped out into the hallway. One of the girls gasped softly. A group of 4 men and 2 women stood in the intersection. One of the women scrunched up her face as she centered her attention on Noorie. She started to draw the sword at her side.
Who the hell are you?
Noorie raised the tetsubo and brought it down on one of the men's faces as the others shifted in their stances to see him. When the tetsubo struck, the bones in the man's skull shattered. The head deflated like a rotten melon. All at once, the men and women yelped out and tried to draw their weapons. Noorie crushed the life out of another thug. His war club smashed the tissue that made up the woman's neck. A particularly gangly fellow with a thinning out hairline stumbled backward. His weasel-like face contorted in disbelief.
Raise the alarm! We've got intruders!
He took another nervous step before turning around and fleeing the group. The thugs tried to stab and slash at him, but Noorie drove them back with a series of wide and powerful swings. They retreated slightly, and Noorie positioned himself in the middle of the intersection. One of the thugs got a little bolder and lunged. Noorie thrust his tetsubo into the man's chest. The man's face blanched, and he fell to a knee. Apisa landed beside Noorie, but she appeared different. Whereas once she possessed slightly rough but soothing hands, Apisa now had vicious tiger claws at the end of her fingertips. Thick, dark green scales covered her hands and forearms. A brilliant pink glow emitted from her leg tattoo.
Are you ready to lose? 'Cause I'm itching to whoop your butt.
A woman swung her axe at Apisa, but Apisa slammed her scaled forearm against the axe blade. A loud ting resounded, but Apisa didn't appear the least bit hurt. While the woman stared in open confusion, Apisa reached forward and gripped the woman's throat. Quickly, Apisa pulled her hand back and then tossed a bloody mess against the wooden floor. Noorie dodged out of the way of a man's sword and smacked him in the side of the head. Apisa pounced on another person. Screams echoed out. The brief fight ended when Noorie crushed the spine of a thug trying to get away. Noorie rested his Tatsubo on his shoulder and turned to survey the scene. The thug who Apisa had leapt upon had deep lines carved into his cheeks and nose. Compared to the woman who had her throat torn out, the man must have died with much more anguish before he passed. For a lowlander, Apisa was quite savage. Noorie turned around to check on the other girls, but then jumped in fright. The most grotesque figure that Noorie had ever seen stood right behind him, eye to eye. Noorie swung with all of his strength. His Tatsubo sailed through the man's body and splintered the corner of the intersection.
Ah! You could have hit one of us, you incompetent buffoon! This is another one of my masterpieces. Clara and I are behind it.
Reiko got up from a crouching position behind the illusion and gave Noorie a stern glare. Clara had been well out of Norrie's range, but she eyed the damage Noorie had created in the wall with apprehension nonetheless.
I'm sorry, but this thing surprised me. What is this horrid creature, anyways?
The figure possessed a pair of oversized giant lower teeth, pimple-marked cheeks, and crazy eyes that hinted at murder and bloodlust. The longer he studied the figure, the more ire that Noorie collected in his cheeks. Reiko flashed him a smile of pure amusement.
It's an Onistan. You, of all people, should be able to identify one of your own kind when you see one.
Apisa pointed a clawed finger at Reiko.
Now isn't the time for jokes or petty insults. Let's get on with what we're here to do.
Blood dripped down her hands and claws.
She's right. We have to find the downstairs steps.
Norrie's hands tingled with red-hot vibrancy. He breathed in and out several times and even whirled around to avoid looking at either Reiko or her horrible expression of his people. The image of popping her skull blinked within the blackness of his mind, but Noorie batted it away like smoke from a fire. He moved in the same direction as the man who fled, and came to a set of stairs going up to the second floor. Noorie grunted softly before turning toward the girls.
Damn, no good. We have to keep looking.
Several armed thugs rounded a corner with weapons drawn on either side of Apisa and Reiko. At the same time, another pair of thugs moved to the top of the stairs. Noorie planted a foot on the bottom stair.
I've got two coming down.
He clobbered the stairs with his war club. Splinters of wood sprayed in the air, and the stairs crumbled into piles of debris. The thugs halted their advance, but they lowered their stances. Clara stepped up beside Noorie. Though she still shook a little, a unique glimmer sparkled in her eyes.
I got them.
She closed her eyes and clasped her hands together, as if praying. Her lips parted ever so slightly, though she didn't say any words. A strange purple and pink hue flashed up from the back of her collar, and moments later, an eerie hot pink mist floated up from her lips. Norrie's stomach twirled about. The thugs crouched down a little more, but they held their weapons at the ready. Noorie stepped in front of Clara, blocking her from the adversaries. Just as the thugs were about to lunge, a small brown ball of energy floated out from one of the wooden beams that made up the ceiling. Within seconds, the ball began to take a distinct shape. The top half of the ball became a small torso, complete with arms, a neck, and an otherworldly face. The bottom of the sphere tapered off to a point like that of a ghosty tail. Clara stepped around Noorie and gazed up at the entity with compassionate, excited eyes.
Can you please help us fight these guys? I don't want to kill them. I just want to restrain them.
The little brown energy figure nodded and then zipped back into one of the wooden beams. The thugs looked around nervously. Thick wooden arms stretched out from the walls and ceiling and extended down to the pair of thugs. The thugs' weapons clattered against the solidness of the arms, but nothing could stop them from being grappled. Large wooden fingers grabbed their arms and throats. Both of the guards were lifted into the air and suspended above the ground. Noorie swallowed to moisten his dry throat.
Was that a commie?
Several panicked screams echoed out behind them. Noorie led the way while Clara followed closely behind. 5 bodies littered the corridor, and each one of them wore grievous claw marks like badges of honor. A red liquid carpet covered the wooden floors. Apisa, Reiko, and the illusionary Onistan stood huddled beside one another.
Other people decided to crash your little party.
Reiko moved to the far end of the corridor.
Let us venture this way. Perhaps the stairs to the basement are in this direction.
The illusionary Onistan ran just in front of Reiko. Noorie took up the rear. A foreboding silence befell the house. Noorie licked his dry lips as he walked behind Clara. In the absence of noise, Norrie's spirit clenched and unclenched like a fist. When the group came to another intersection, a thug hopped out of a room and slashed at the illusion. The fake Onistan ducked under the blow and swung its crude club at the man. The club barely whisked past the thug's face, but the thug screamed nonetheless. Apisa sprinted to the illusion and tackled the man to the ground. The back of his head smacked against the hard floor. He tried to push himself up, but Apisa carved open the man's chest. After a few rapid swipes, Apisa hopped to her feet. She beamed over her shoulder.
I think it's safe to say I'm winning.
Whatever. Let's just find those stairs.
Apisa stepped over the bleeding corpse and moved down the right corridor. Reiko sneered at the body and jumped over it as if she were a bunny. Clara winced as she moved past it too. At the end of the hallway, the group came to a set of stairs going downward.
Who wants the honor of going first?
Noorie eased his way past the women and moved down the stairs with caution. He descended into a lower level with several metal lanterns hanging on the walls every 5 feet or so. Soft candlelight flickered within each of the lanterns. Shadows danced on the walls. The hallway came to a cross intersection, and then it continued forth until it formed a T intersection at the far end of the basement.
We have to find this guy fast. Should we split up?
Apisa suddenly grinned and then grabbed Clara's arm.
We'll go to the right. You two take left.
An icy spasm exploded within Norrie's stomach. He glanced at Apisa and Clara as they disappeared around the corner, but then slowly maneuvered around to regard Reiko. The brunette illusionist cast a terrible glare at Apisa as she disappeared from view. Within moments, Reiko turned that hateful stare upon him. She let out a sigh.
Well, let's get this begrudging ordeal over with then.
She gestured to the left corner.
By all means, proceed. You are the Bonnie Mountain Savage, not I.
Norrie's jaw tightened again, and he stormed down the left corridor with rage-filled intention. His heavy feet slapped against the wood purposely, and Noorie darted his attention all around.
Oh, please let someone jump out.
When Noorie came to a room, he stepped in the doorway. His shoulders were squared, and his tetsubo remained poised. Pillows and small tables filled the room. Little dirty plates and utensils sat on the tabletops. Stains covered the floor mats. The next room also contained similar furniture. Noorie peeked behind him. The fake Onistan traipsed behind Reiko. Its eyes were crossed at unusual angles, and the illusion's tongue hung out of its mouth like that of a sick animal. Reiko slowly moved in his wake. Her arms were crossed over her chest, but she peered into the rooms with interest.
Not there either. I do hope that he's alright. I'd hate to see anything happen to that wonderful fellow.
I find it peculiar to hear anything nice coming out from your mouth.
To those who deserve such grace and reverence, they receive it in plenty. Do not attempt to define me, you foul cretin. You know nothing of me.
And you know nothing of me. You've been absolutely intolerable since I met you.
I know enough about you, you damned Onistan. You ogres are all the same.
Reiko brushed past him.
Let's do what we came here to do. This pointless chatter with you is infecting me with stupid.
Noorie moved faster than Reiko and took the lead again. The hallway turned to the right and stretched down a little ways. They came upon a small storage room filled with barrels and sacks. Aside from foodstuffs, there weren't any signs of any hostages. Noorie let out a small groan and then ran down the hallway to the next doorway. Stealth be damned. They needed to find this man and be gone before things got really dangerous. The doorway opened to a large room that contained several small wooden cells and various tables. Another door existed on the far side of the room. Torture tools rested on the tabletops. Manacles hung from the walls. A single person occupied the room, and he hung from his arms from one of the sets of manacles. The man's body was covered in bluish-blackish bruises. Blood seeped from several little cuts along his ribs and limbs. His head hung down lifelessly.
There he is. By all that is holy, please be alive.
She ran to the man and placed her hands on his neck.
I'll get the others.
Reiko didn't acknowledge him, but she kept touching the captive in various places. Noorie exited through the other door and moved down the hallway with haste. Within moments he found Apisa and Flare inside one of the rooms. Flare crouched behind Apisa and had her hands interlaced together. Apisa stood up and had her clawed hands held up.
Oh, it's only you.
Apisa shook her head and allowed her hands to turn back to normal.
You can't sneak up on us like that. I could have killed you.
You couldn't kill me. Come on, we found the doctor's husband.
One of the girls grumbled to herself, but Noorie didn't quite make out what was said. He stormed back down the corridor like a rampaging bull. Reiko stood before the man, and she applied some kind of liquid to his wounds.
What are you doing?
Reiko didn't take her eyes off of the doctor's husband.
What does it look like I'm doing? I'm cleaning his wounds so they won't get infected. Must I explain all of my actions to you?
You just happen to have antiseptic on you. I mean, that's great news for us, but I'm just surprised.
Reiko let out an exasperated sigh and gave him a scornful sideways glance.
My mother is a doctor and my father makes medicine. I know the value of having these kinds of luxuries on hand.
She glanced past Noorie.
Oh good, you're here. Help me get this man free.
Flare clasped her hands together and closed her eyes. Just as before, a mysterious light emitted from the back of Flare's collar. When she parted her lips, a stream of pink mist floated out and filtered into the air. This time, a gray-blackish sphere of energy slithered out of the metal chains that held up the man. The sphere took on a shape of a half-person, just like the kami from before. Flare opened her eyes and turned her attention to the kami.
Can you please break the chains so we can free this man? He's innocent, and we need to get him back home to his wife.
The metal kami nodded and floated back into the chains. Within seconds, the manacles opened up and the man fell into Reiko's arms. She eased him to the floor and started examining him closely. The ceiling creaked overhead. Noorie held up his tetsubo.
We've got company. From the sounds of it, a lot of company.
Thunderous feet echoed from the hallway. Flare crouched by the man while Reiko and Apisa stood over the pair of them. The room had two entrances, one leading to the main hallway, and the other leading to the side corridor that Reiko and Noorie had come down. Noorie placed himself in front of the doorway leading to the main corridor. Over a dozen men and women moved into the room, but they stopped once they saw Noorie. On the other side of the room, 8 more thugs came in through the side entrance. An overweight middle-aged man pushed his way to the front of the crowd and gave Noorie a critical review. He wore a vibrant red long-sleeved jacket with a pair of black slacks. A blade with a gaudy hilt hung at the man's side. He also had a bushy mustache that clung to the underside of a nose too small for the man's face.
What in the hell's going on here? Who the hell do you think you are to attack my home and kill my people?
Reiko pointed at the chubby man.
You, sir, are a villain. What gives you the right to abduct people from their homes and torture them? You sicken me.
The large man waved her off.
Shut the hell up, you obnoxious cow. This man's wife caused my son to die, so I'm going to make her pay in kind.
Dr. Calcisti helps and heals people. She would never be the cause for someone to die. You're a liar!
Am I? I came to her for medicine to help cure my son of typhoid plague. The medicine she gave me didn't work, and my son died.
Typhoid plague? Don't you know anything, you moronic glutton? Typhoid plague has a significant mortality rate. Once it hits your system, there's little a doctor to do.
I don't like your mouth, you dolled-up little whore!
Noorie leapt forward and swung at the man's face. The fat man froze, but the tetsubo just sailed over the top of the man's skull. A savage wind trailed the war club. The fat man panted heavily. He stared at Noorie with wide eyes, and his guards clustered around him.
Enough of this! We're leaving with this man alive. Either move aside, or make peace with your lives.
Kill them!
Before the guards could move forward, Noorie swung his tetsubo back in a wide arc. The men and women stayed on the outside of Norrie's range, and none dared to move inward. Noorie leapt at them as he roared out loudly. His war club slammed down on a woman's shoulder. She buckled under the pressure and collapsed to the ground. Other thugs slashed or stabbed at him, but Noorie knocked their weapons away with his own. They tried over and over again, but they met with the same result. Noorie countered when he could, and more often than not, those he struck failed to get up again. When one person fell to the ground, another one lunged in to take his or her place. They all had the same look in their eyes, though: panic, unease, and uncertainty. Every consecutive fighter possessed a little less courage than the thug who preceded them. Norrie's muscles pumped wildly, and his heart raced. He whirled to the sides as metal moved past him. When the last person fell to the ground under Norrie's massive strength, he turned around to view the three girls. One of the guards kept swinging at Reiko's illusions, while a second guard had his sword blade pressed against Apisa's forearm. The scales on her skin stopped the blade from doing any real damage. A confident smirk lay plastered on Apisa's face. Her tattoo flashed, and her muscles quivered ever so slightly for just a second. She pushed the man forward, and the man toppled backwards. He fell upon his back, and before he could get back up, Apisa grabbed the man's head with her clawed hands. With a quick twist of her body, the man's head came off his shoulders. A great stillness fell over the room. Bodies laid everywhere around them, and most of the corpses were scattered around where Noorie fought. Clara sat beside the unconscious man and watched both doors.
I think the boss got away.
Apisa walked over to Noorie.
Well, I can't believe you took out so many of his henchmen. I was wrong about you. There is no way we could have done this without you.
I'm going to have to agree. Seems like there are advantages to having a barbarian following us around. Fancy that.
Noorie gestured his Tetsubo toward Apisa.
Thank you for your kind words. If you carry this, I'll carry him.
Apisa took it in her hands and almost dropped it.
Wow, it's heavier than I was expecting. I can manage it, though.
Noorie bent down and gently lifted the man into his arms. Clara placed her hands under the man's body until Noorie had properly secured him in his grasp.
Be easy with him, Mr. Noorie. He's pretty banged up.
I promise I'll be as gentle as I can be. Lead the way and I'll follow.
Apisa gripped the Tetsubo and ran ahead of the others. Noorie came up last, but Clara moved right beside him. She never took her eyes away from the battered man. The sun fell toward the horizon and cast a brilliant shower of oranges and yellows over the land. The streets had become less crowded, but people still walked to and fro. More than a few of the citizens stopped and watched as Noorie and his friends made their way down the street. When they finally arrived at Dr. Calcisti's shop, she ran out to greet them. Tears fell from her cheeks as she gently touched her husband's face. Noorie couldn't help but smile down at her.
Thank you all. No doubt my husband would be dead had it not been for you.
She took turns gazing at all of the girls, and then finally settled her attention on Noorie.
All of you.
Flair touched the woman's arm.
I'm sorry to say the boss of the gang escaped us. Living in Jedi probably won't be safe anymore. You might want to leave tonight.
Dr. Calcisti caressed her husband's face again.
I don't know where we're going to go. I know it's necessary for us to start over, but...
You should go to Tolfagas and seek out Dr. Radanashi. My mother is a practicing physician in Tolfagas, and my father makes high-quality medicine. They will help you get back on your feet.
Truly? That would be wonderful.
Sweet warmth wavered in Norrie's throat.
You still have my loot case, right? I have the coins I've made from being a street musician. It's not much, but you can use it to pay for a hotel room tonight, and part of your ship's passage.
More tears fell down Dr. Calcisti's cheeks.
Your collective generosity knows no bounds. Thank you.
Noorie stepped closer to her shop.
Collect some things to travel with, and then I'll carry him to an inn for you.
Within the hour, Noorie, Apisa, Reiko, and Flara left Dr. Calcisti and her still unconscious husband at the Underdog Inn. As they walked under the starry sky, Noorie noticed the girls gave him sideways glances.
What are you all gaping at? Do I have a wound or something on my face?
No, it's nothing like that. I think we're all just surprised.
Why? I don't recall doing anything unexpected.
You're not like other vile honestans. It's both confusing and refreshing all at once.
Reiko! Can't you stop being racist for once? We just survived something tough together.
I was trying to be polite. He gave him a compliment after all.
It's fine. I'm used to people thinking like that. It doesn't bother me much anymore. I'm sorry that I'm making you all feel uncomfortable. It's not my intention. I'm just trying to do my duty.
Flare walked up beside him. This time she stared into his eyes. Her irises still wavered quite a bit, but she maintained her focus.
You're not the one making me uncomfortable. It's the situation I dislike. I hate being who I am. I never wanted a life like that. Not only that, but...
Her volume shrank to a barely audible mumble.
I don't like talking with people I don't really know.
You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. Chutar are trained to be silent protectors.
What's a chutar? Is that some kind of fancy word for bodyguard?
Flare stopped and surveyed the area around them, and Noorie did the same. No one was within earshot, and the people they did see moved with increased pace. Flare's usually meek voice came out in an even softer whisper.
The Chutar are the elite royal guards for the Empress and her immediate family. They protect the palace in Siemba. I seem to remember that only 100 of them are in existence at any one time.
Reiko tilted her head up at Noorie and gently caressed her chin with a pair of fingers.
So this rather large brute is an elite, then? I suppose that does warrant some greater degree of respect. After all, I doubt the Imperial throne would knowingly employ an individual of dastardly morals. If Clara is any indicator of how her mother is, then perhaps I've been too harsh on you.
Perhaps? Let's not sugarcoat it here. You are being downright awful to him.
Reiko rolled her eyes.
I apologize for my potentially dreadful behavior. Though I still detest your people, I'll find restraint in my interactions with you.
Noorie narrowed his eyes but said nothing.
Sorry, big guy. That's probably the best apology you're going to get from her at this point.
Like I said, I'm used to this kind of thing.
Mr. Noorie, thank you for helping our friend tonight. It really means a lot.
You're welcome. So, where are we going next?
I think I want to go to bed. I'll see you two in the morning. Good night.
Flora walked down the street, and Noorie silently walked beside her. Apisa and Reiko didn't join them in the stroll, and neither he nor Flora said anything to one another. When they got to their adjacent rooms, Flora finally glanced over at him.
Good night, Mr. Noorie. Again, thank you for helping us today.
Help you? You're the ones who followed me, remember?
She blinked at him several times before she went into her dorm room. Noorie went into his room as well. The sweetness of the bed called out to him, and he was more than happy to be consumed by its siren song. Chapter 3.
You're going to wake him up!
That's the point, darling. We're trying to stir him. Honestly.
Both of you, please quiet down. We're going to wait here until he wakes up on his own.
Noorie slowly opened his eyes. He let out a great yawn as he pushed himself up and gazed around. 3 figures came into view, and they lorded over him with wide, observant expressions. His muscles tensed and his fists balled. Noorie scooted back so that his back touched the wall. Apisa, Reiko, and Flora stood over him. Noorie opened his eyes a little wider in hopes of dispelling the sleepiness.
Whoa, what's going on? Are you all in trouble?
Not exactly. Flare has something she wants to discuss with you.
Me? I thought we were all going to tell him.
Reiko leaned up against the wall and chuckled.
You're the one who's been having the dream, darling. You're also his employer. It should be you to bring this to his attention.
I agree with Little Miss Prissy Britches.
You know full well I've never worn breeches in my life. I'm not some uncouth farmhand like you.
Flora stepped between them.
Please, don't start arguing. We have to focus on the matter at hand.
After a brief moment, Apisa and Reiko looked away from one another. Flora sat down on the far edge of Noorie's bed. Noorie sat up and the blankets fell to his waist. All at once, the girls gasped.
What happened to you? Your chest is so...
I like your scars. My pop always used to say you could tell a lot from a person by the scars that carry. So what's your story?
Noorie absent-mindedly traced his index finger along one of the many deep etchings he had on his skin.
It's not a big deal. When I was a kid, I got in a fight with a cave bear.
A cave bear? Aren't cave bears enormous? How did you survive?
Perhaps the more interesting question is, what were you doing messing with a cave bear as a child anyway? Was it some kind of primitive, honest-down test of strength?
Apisa and Flare turned around and narrowed their eyes at her.
What? I didn't see anything mean that time. I'm generally curious.
No offense, but I don't really know you all well enough to discuss it. So why are you all here? What is this all about?
Flare averted her eyes, but Apisa just kept staring at him.
I was wanting to ask for your help. You see, I've been having a reoccurring dream. It's always been so vivid and powerful, and I'm just starting to think it's more than just a dream.
Noorie shifted in the bed a little.
So how can I help you with the dream? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
I'd like to visit the place in my dream. It's not terribly far from here.
Flare fiddled with her fingers in her lap.
It's in a forest to the north. The problem is that it might be dangerous.
After what you showed us yesterday, we'd be more comfortable going to the forest if you were there. Will you come with us?
When would we leave?
As soon as you get out of bed. We've already cleared it with Madame Howe. We have horses and provisions for travel.
Noorie swallowed hard for a moment, but remained where he lay.
Okay. If you leave the room, I'll meet you outside in about 5 minutes.
What's wrong? Are you insecure about your body? It's not like we've not seen a man in his undergarments before.
I'll wait outside.
Noorie bunched the blankets around his lower body.
I'd appreciate it if you all waited outside. You see, I'm used to colder climate, and the southern heat really makes it, hard to sleep in clothes at night.
Southern heat?
Flare peeked at Noorie from the corner of her eye. She lowered her gaze for a moment before she hopped off the bed. In a flash, the door to Norrie's bedroom opened wide, and Flare ducked out. Reiko maneuvered out, but she cast him a questioning glance before she disappeared around the corner. Apisa backstepped out, but faced him as she moved away.
I always rather enjoyed the southern heat myself. Don't feel bad. I tend to sleep naked too.
She closed the door behind her. An ocean of grass danced beneath Tove as he soared through the gray, overcast sky. Lightning flashed in the distance, and the scent of rain heralded what would be a great onslaught upon the land. The temperature slowly chilled with each moment. Tove landed on top of one of the many hills that made up this untouched hint of paradise. Thankfully, no humans were in sight. The closest city existed several miles to the east, and from the looks of it, none of their kind ventured out this far in the grasslands. He drew in a deep breath and smiled. Tove cleared his mind and closed his eyes. Thunder rumbled somewhere far away, but the echoes sent primal shivers throughout his core. The storm's aroma intensified and became a delicious perfume. Long grass flapped in the gusts and created a delicate rhythm that soothed Tove's restless soul. Tove took one final breath before he opened the sack that was tied to his belt. Slowly, Tove studied each of the items. Intricate runes and symbols covered the flute on both sides of the finger holes. The wand resembled a burnt twig or branch. It even twisted about in a curvy fashion. The rubber ball was bright red and it appeared completely smooth. Tove took out the rubber ball and tossed it onto the hill. The ball whisked through the air, collided with the grass, and then exploded into a wide mess of thick, red goo. Grass sizzled and melted away. An oddly cinnamon smell coated the air and intermixed with the impending rain. When all of the grass had been eaten away, shapes started to arise from the surface of the goo. As the shapes took more distinct form, they began to change in color. A medium-sized brown tent stood at the edge of the burned circle. A single old moss-covered log laid in front of the tent's open entrance. Light flickered from the goo, and a fire crackling from a fire pit plopped down before the log. Tove sat on the log and sat his bag beside him. Waves of warmth caressed his face. Violent images flashed in his mind's eye. His spine quaked in response. Every inch of his skin felt oily and unclean. Thunder clapped across the sky, this time much closer to Tove's camp. A single raindrop fell from the sky. Rather than collide with Tove, it splattered against an invisible, opaque red bubble that surrounded the camp. More raindrops fell. The storm sent its fury against the grasslands. Tove peered into the sky just in time to see a fork of lightning scattered across the clouds. An entire people, even though they were traitors to the Celestial Ones, had been wiped out utterly. Their city had been demolished and repurposed by Gajok and his Oni. One less foe stood in the way of the Celestial One's return. Tove should be rejoicing. His heart throbbed wildly. A great tightness had formed in the base of his throat. Among the mighty warriors who died, many Onistan children had been slaughtered too. No, not slaughtered. Using that word diminished the travesty that befell them. No, the Onistan children had been devoured. The weight in Tove's gut pulsated and grew in girth. He sighed. The Onistans had betrayed their masters, and they deserved death. All of the humans deserved it. Despite that, Tove's skin crawled at the images that would soon haunt his dreams. Lives would be snuffed out beneath the unstoppable torrent that would wash over the land. In that great tsunami of vengeance, the Alguan would survive. They would finally thrive again, be free from the heel of the human rabble. It wouldn't be just the humans who died, though. The other treacherous yokai races would have to be eliminated as well. More living things would squirm in anguish before they felt the wrath of the Celestial Ones. Each of those lives would darken Tove's soul further. A darkened soul was an adequate sacrifice to bring balance back to all things, and to save his people. Tove winced. If the masters did not return, the Alguai would be hunted to extinction. Tove reached into his bag and pulled out the metal flute. It felt icy cold in his fingers. Many of the foes would die, but not all of them. Perhaps he could take some solace in that fact. He brought the flute up to his lips and played. Tove didn't play anything specific, but he allowed the notes to pour from the instrument, or at least he thought he did. Absolute silence lingered around him, but Tove continued to play. The air vibrated with magical energies, and Tove's soul wrestled within him. The music no doubt traveled on the air, and they would come. After about 5 minutes of playing, Tove stopped and placed the flute back in the bag. The rain continued to fall all around him. Underneath the din of its constant pitter-patter against his bubble, his heart raced in his ears.
That storm's probably gonna hit us before we break for camp.
He stared at the dark gray wall of clouds that lined the distant horizon. Bright white flashes illuminated several sections of the clouds. The storm's perfume rode the strong winds that blasted past him. Noorie rubbed his fingers on the leather strap of the horse's reins. Clara, Reiko, and Apisa all rode behind him on their own mounts, but none of them regarded the oncoming storm with much interest. Whereas their horses were common traveling mares, Noorie rode upon an older, beefier farm stallion. Norrie's stallion's coat was dark brown, but it almost appeared red in the light. Noorie referred to his horse as Mac. Mac moved with a slow but steady determination down the dirt road. Apisa and Reiko rode behind him about 10 feet back and engaged in conversation. While they talked, Reiko fussed with her horse's mane. She had already tied several bells in the white horse's white hair. The bells jingled sweetly as the horse galloped beside Apisa's light golden-coated mare. Apisa had taken the time to tie a pink bow in the horse's mane, but that had been when they were leading Jedi. Clara rode 5 feet behind Reiko and Apisa on a brown mare whose coat almost resembled Mac's. Instead of being redder in the light, Clara's mount had an almost orange coloring to it. Clara rode along, but she had an unrolled scroll open before her. The barest hint of a smile curled at her lips as she studied the contents of the scroll. Noorie cleared his throat.
I said, that storm's probably gonna hit us before we break for camp.
Flare blinked for a moment and then glanced up at him.
What storm?
She scanned the horizon for a moment. She pointed at the distant clouds.
You mean that one over there? I'm sure we can at least keep going for another few hours before we'll be forced to stop.
What's wrong? Is the big honest Stan afraid of getting a little damp? Even I'm not very concerned with a little drizzle. And that's saying something.
Yeah, it's only water. I'm sure it won't be anything to worry about.
I was simply making an observation.
Flare lowered her gaze back to her scroll, and Apisa and Reiko started conversing again. Noorie shook his head and started scratching the back of Mac's mane. He only did it for a few moments, but Mac let out a small neigh. Noorie reached into his bag and pulled out a rather thick scroll. The softness of the paper felt great under his thumb, not for the textile sensation, but for the profoundness of its contents. As he studied it, Norrie's heart beat warmly. The visage of a large but earthily beautiful woman flickered in his mind's eye. Slowly, Noorie unrolled the scroll and read the all-too-familiar lines.
Lords of Majesty, piercing the heavens with grace, stand guard over us. Show us what strength is, and gift us with endurance. Fill us with courage. We alone stand true against the darkness of light. We guard the Empire. Their agents will come and herald the evil ones to break our spirit. We will outlast them, standing strong like the mountains. Onista will thrive.
Apisa's voice broke him away from his concentration.
So what are you reading?
Noorie glanced up. Apisa strode beside him.
What? I'm sorry. Were you talking to me?
Well, yeah. You're the only one reading something, aren't you?
Noorie peered behind him. Reiko and Flare talked in whispered voices, but they both grinned as they did so.
I suppose I am. It's Onistan poetry. To be specific, I'm reading one of Onista's oldest poems, titled The Unforgettable Oath.
Oh yeah? What's the oath about?
A small chuckle erupted from the pits of Norrie's stomach, and it bubbled its way up through his throat. He didn't let it reach his lips, though, and he crushed it by clearing his throat.
To be honest, no one really remembers what it was an oath for. It's still a very special poem, because it exemplifies what every Onistan should strive to be like. My mother used to read the poem to me when I went to bed as a child. When I was drafted by the Chutar, she gave me a copy of some of the greatest Onistan poems ever composed. She wanted me to have something of my homeland, so I wouldn't feel quite so out of place in the lowlands.
That sounds really sweet of her. I didn't know Onistans wrote poetry.
We produce music and art too. We're not the beasts and savages that you lowlanders make us out to be.
Lowlanders? Looks like someone's pretty high and mighty about their mountain home. Get it? High? Because you're from the mountains?
She let out a little giggle. Noorie couldn't help but crack a tiny grin as well. Apisa cast a critical eye on him.
That's all I get? You're going to be a tough one to crack. Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted? What are you talking about?
Apisa pressed her thumb into the center of her chest.
I pride myself on making people happy. It's my super special talent. Aside from farm work and magic, mark my words, big guy, I'm going to make you smile.
Right.
He stared ahead at the road winding in the distance.
So tell me about yourself. What's your home like?
Noorie shifted in his saddle so he could inspect her. Apisa rode beside him, absolutely relaxed. She gently held her reins and watched him expectantly.
Why do you want to know? No one ever wants to know that kind of stuff about me.
I don't want you to feel left out and unappreciated. Even though I said you were unwanted and unneeded before, that doesn't mean I can't make you feel welcome now. We're traveling companions now.
I suppose we are. So, you want to know about Onista, huh? Well, imagine being surrounded by the tallest peaks you've ever seen. The cool winds constantly blow around you like a mother's delicate embrace. Every time you draw in life-giving air, you feel a part of the mountain's splendor in your lungs. Beauty lies all around you in the form of clouds, trees, and even the majestic mountains.
The people who live in Onisa all care about one another. They're like extended family. No matter what, you have someone to help you.
Wow, that does sound nice. My home's plenty pretty too. We don't have mountains like you. We have some rolling hills, but most of it's flat. The people who have lived in Buka before me cultivated the land to yield bountiful harvests over and over again. We're living on the fruit of their labors. The work we do today will serve the children of tomorrow. The air's probably not as sweet as where you are from, especially around the pig farms.
We have a couple pig farms in Onisa. I remember the stink being pretty bad.
You haven't truly smelled awful until you strolled past the Buka farms. It changes you forever. So you like poetry, and you play the lute. Why did you become what's it called again?
A chutar. I didn't have a choice. After I earned these scars, I was drafted against my will. I never got the choice to be anything other than an Imperial bodyguard.
So what would you have been, had you the opportunity to choose?
You're asking some deep questions.
Well, I want to get to know you.
Apisa gently petted the back of her horse's neck.
How else are we supposed to become friends if I don't get to know you?
Noorie winced. His stomach clenched tightly, and he averted his eyes from both the road and his companion.
What? Did I say something wrong? You look even more upset than before.
No, it's fine.
Noorie sighed and slowly urged Mac to trot faster. Apisa fell behind, but Noorie heard her talking with someone. He kept his eyes forward. Norrie's inside squirmed as he rolled up the scroll and placed it back in his bags. Apisa still whispered to someone, but Noorie distanced himself from the noise. He took several deep breaths and cleared his thoughts of his anxieties. Over the next couple of hours, the storm on the horizon had rolled much closer. Darkness had trailed underneath its cloudy mass, and thunder crackled in the distance. Judging from the discoloration under the thickest parts of the storm clouds, Noorie and the others could expect a heavy downpour. Noorie beheld the immense splendor of the sea to his left, and to the right, a vast plain of grass and hills stretched as far as the eye could see. He pulled on the reins and stopped Mac.
We may want to make camp. There's no telling how bad this is going to be. I want to make sure the horses have effective cover.
Reiko, Apisa, and Flare turned their attention to the sky, and then nodded collectively. Apisa helped Noorie set up the stable tents for the horses, while Reiko and Flare worked on the sleeping tents. Apisa waited until she and Noorie got 4 of the posts put into the ground before she spoke.
Did I say something to upset you? I'm really sorry if I did.
Noorie tested each of the posts for stability, but refused to look her way.
I promise that you didn't say anything to upset me. Don't worry about me anyway. I'm just Flare's bodyguard. I don't really matter all that much.
She opened her mouth to say something, but then refrained. Once the tarp was secured around the 4 posts, Noorie led each of the horses inside and secured them to a thick iron bar that had been planted in the ground at the far end of the tent. At first, the horses reacted nervously to being put in a makeshift stable. After Noorie gave them their feed bags, the horses calmed down. The great downpour started just as Flare and Reiko finished the first tent.
Get under cover. I'll work on my tent.
Apisa and Flare gave him disapproving glances, but Reiko took them by the arms and led them into the first tent.
You heard him, darlings. We need to get under cover before we catch colds. Noorie comes from the mountains. He's used to being out in the elements, I'm sure.
The girls disappeared into the tent while Noorie set up the posts for his tent. He stored his belongings in the stable to avoid them from getting soaked. It took more than 10 minutes for him to get completely done. Water dripped from his clothes, so he took them off to let them dry. Thunder crackled overhead, and the wind howled wildly. Rain fell upon the camp with such vigor. Noorie just stared out into the rain. A profound emptiness pulsated within him. His imagination painted what life in Onista must have looked like at that moment. He saw Onistans trying to get home in the pouring rain. Rather than get completely soaked, they would stop at a friend's home or business. They collected together and shared stories and connections. Laughter kept the gloom of the rain at bay. It didn't matter what they talked about, for they had one another. They weren't alone. Noorie sighed and prepared his bedroll. A chill blew into the tent, but he couldn't close the tent flap. Someone had to keep watch. The storm subsided after about 3 hours. By that point, the sun had only an hour left before it would dip below the horizon. Noorie put on his wet clothes and left his tent. He moved into the stable tent, opened one of the saddlebags, and took out the emergency stack of firewood he had bought in Jedi. It didn't take a long time to start up a fire. As soon as it started crackling, the girls exited their tents and sat alongside the fire. A strange solemnness had come over the girls. They gazed into the flames as if searching for meaning. Noorie broke the silence.
So, how much farther is this forest we're looking for?
Fleur shifted in her seat and peeked at him through cautious eyes.
I'd say we'll get there by the end of the day tomorrow. It would probably be a good idea to camp one more night before trying to go into the woods at night. Forests are dangerous at night.
Noorie let out a humph. The warmth of the fire felt nice, and soon his clothes started to dry. Reiko yawned and moved toward her tent.
I'm going to bed now. A lady does need a beauty sleep after all.
Actually, I have a question. How is this going to work? Aren't we supposed to take watches or something? Or did you plan on doing that all yourself?
Noorie gripped the Tetsubo beside him.
I'm the most equipped to handle that. I've been trained to operate on less sleep than a normal person.
That's just silly. How's it supposed to work anyway? We each get 2 or 3 hours for a watch? If so, I'll take second watch.
That's unnecessary. You all get some sleep.
Fleur interlaced her fingers together and closed her eyes. A purple and pink hue glowed up from the back of her dress. Pink mist floated up from her barely parted lips. A moment later, 3 fairly large brown spheres floated up from the ground. They took shape into half people, half ghosts.
Excuse me, can you please watch over us while we sleep?
The kami spirits nodded and then descended into the ground. A few moments later, giant rock columns rose from the ground. Noorie rose to his feet and held up his Tetsubo. Giant figures made of rock pulled themselves from the ground and lowered it over the group. The top of Norie's head reached their waists.
Easy there, you brute. You don't have to destroy everything you see. Those are Earth Kami. I assume they're going to solve our who's going to be on watch quandary. Right?
We can all get a full night's rest now. After 8 hours, we can resume our journey.
The 3 massive Earth Kami positioned themselves around the camp and remained still like statues. Noorie studied them for a moment, and he lowered his Tetsubo.
If it's all the same, I'll stay up for about 3 hours, just to be safe.
Fleur and Reiko moved to the tent, but Apisa remained where she sat.
Would you like some company or something? It might be really lonely just sitting out here with them.
Apisa pointed to one of the massive forms.
I doubt they're going to be good for conversation.
No thank you. I do appreciate it, though. Go on and get some rest.
Apisa frowned as she moved toward the tent. A pang of guilt struck Noorie in the heart.
Hey, Apisa.
She gazed back at him.
Yeah?
How about you and I talk tomorrow, while we ride to the forest, I mean?
An appraising twinkle danced in her eyes.
You promise we'll actually get to know one another? I hate having people around me feel lonely or unwelcomed.
I promise.
Apisa approached him and held out her littlest right finger to him.
Do you pinky promise? My granny always used to say you're never supposed to break a pinky promise.
Noorie couldn't help it. A small chuckle bubbled up from him, and he grinned. As soon as Apisa saw it, her expression soared.
Ha! I did it! I made you smile! Now, pinky promise me so I can go to bed. I'm tuckered out after a long day's travel.
Noorie interlocked his pinky with hers.
I pinky promise I'll talk with you tomorrow.
Apisa nodded and then went back to her tent. She didn't look back before she closed the tent flap. Noorie gazed up at the sky and saw the last bits of light fade from existence. Soon the stars would appear. Noorie always loved seeing the stars. When the first little light appeared in the heavens, Noorie focused on it. He and his mother used to watch the stars come out many years before. His soul trembled, but he couldn't identify a cause. A deep longing took hold of him. It refused to let go. The darkness surrounded the camp, and the fire died down. Noorie rose and went to his tent. Before he moved inside, he breathed in a final whiff of the sweet night air. Tomorrow would be better. After all, he had made a pinky promise. The quiet stillness that had dominated Tove's camp all morning finally started to dissipate as the sun reached its zenith. Tove sat on the log before the burned-out spot where the fire had burned the night before. He twirled a small blade of grass in his fingertips. It had been so easy to pluck it from the thousands of other surrounding blades of grass. With little effort, it was split apart from its roots. By all accounts, the blade of grass was weak. During last night's storm, though, Tove had seen something unique. A great storm had ravaged the area with howling winds and frequent crackles of lightning. The gusts had been so great that the few trees in the area groaned in protest as the wind nearly snatched their branches away. When that same wind had blown upon the oceans of grass, the individual blades just danced about, unconcerned with the storm's fury. Tove studied the grass closer. How could something so weak be able to withstand the forces that boasted the strength that toppled tougher entities? The humans in Yaokai of 1,000 years ago managed to topple their divine masters. Now, the Yaogwai were the grass, whereas the human filth had become the tall trees. The Yaokai traders had no doubt thrived as well, while the Yaogwai had to cling to the shadows, hoping to avoid detection. Would the same principle that worked 1,000 years ago work today? Would the weaker of the races be saved while the dominant ones were consumed by the ravages of destiny? The celestial ones promised that the Yaogwai would emerge and thrive once more. Intense yet pleasant warmth covered his right arm. Tove glanced down to the little golden armband with a pebble-sized yellow jewel embedded within it. The armband covered his wrist and traveled halfway up his forearm. As the warmth continued to seep into Tove's veins, the jewel glowed with a bright yellow hue. The jewel flashed several times. In the depths of Tove's mind, he heard the all-too-familiar voices. They sounded like a beautiful choir who spoke in unison. With each word that entered his thoughts, Tove shivered.
The Mogwai are near. Establish dominance. They are needed.
Tove balled his fists up and stood up from a prone position. The vast sea of grass danced all around him, and yet he didn't see anyone or anything. Unseen eyes drilled into him. His spine quivered under pressure of hidden presences. A palpable malice festered in the air. He surveyed the grass one more time.
I know you're out there. Come out. I have summoned you.
The wind blew past him, and a strange, musky animal scent filled his nose. A furry creature rose up from the grass. How it had been concealed before mystified Tove, for the creature stood as tall as he did. A pair of long, pointed ears jutted from the sides of the monster's face. A pair of bulbous eyes watched him with keen interest. The creature licked its cracked lips with a slimy purple tongue. Rows of jagged teeth rose up from dark purple gums. White and brown hair covered every inch of the creature's body. It had claws and hands for feet. The Mogwai spoke in a screechy voice.
You are the one who summoned us, a lowly human.
I'm aware your kind has lost much in 1,000 years. But surely you can see I'm not a human. Have you truly fallen so far that you're little better than beasts?
Beasts?
It took a threatening step toward him.
I'll show you a beast, you sickly wench. I'll suck out your intestines through your neck.
The Mogwai launched at Tove, but Tove rolled away from it. His energy sword appeared in his hands as he made it to his feet. The Mogwai whirled around and stared at Tove with a wild, crazed glimmer in its eyes. It advanced on him again. Tove swung his sword at the Mogwai's body. The energy blade touched the creature's fur and burned a bald spot on the creature's skin. A foul stench wafted all around Tove, but he ignored it. Welts had formed on the bare skin, but nothing more. Tove's heart thumped harder.
Did you think your magic stick would kill the likes of me?
Its savage claws raked against Tove's chest. Blood seeped from his wounds as he fell away from the monster. Before Tove had the chance to inspect his wounds, the monster leapt at him again. Tove countered and added more welts and bare spots to the monster's hide. The Mogwai grinned devilishly at him. It leaned in and tried to bite him. Tove shoved his energy blade into the creature's teeth. A dreadful scream poured out from the blade. It pulled at its mouth and felt where several teeth had melted away. Tove whirled around the Mogwai and slashed at one of the welts that he had created earlier. The skin turned even redder, and blisters covered the exposed area.
Perhaps you're not as tough as you think.
The Mogwai turned around and tried to rend Tove with its claws. Every time one of its razor fingers came toward Tove, he dodged the blow. As the Mogwai tried to attack again, Tove counterattacked and focused on the welts. Any amount of glee the Mogwai once had faded behind a mask of concern. Tove brought the edge of his sword against one particular welt over and over again. With each graze, the skin got redder and more agitated. As the wound got more agitated, the Mogwai attacked with even more furious ferocity. Tove slid his blade against the same welt again. The Mogwai's side split open, and blood seeped out like a waterfall. As it tried to close up that wound, Tove focused on another welt. His lungs heaved at the effort, but Tove kept pushing himself all the harder. Even in its wounded state, the Mogwai could kill him if it landed one good blow. More blood fountains opened up on the Mogwai, and its fur turned crimson. The Mogwai fell to its knees and held up its hands.
Okay, I concede. Mercy!
Tove stepped in front of the monster and thrust his sword into its right eye. The blade sizzled as the eye juices covered its brilliant edge. For a moment, the Mogwai just crouched there, open-mouthed. Within seconds, it collapsed on its back. The area around Tove grew quiet. The peculiar animal scent still lingered in the air.
I know you're there. Come out and attend me. I've summoned you for a purpose.
He whirled around and stared into the long bushes of grass. Smaller shapes rose from concealment. 30 smaller Mogwai had gathered in the area. They all watched Tove with grave concern. One of the larger Mogwai crept up to him, but it placed its belly on the ground.
Who are you? Why have you summoned us? How did you summon us?
Tove extended his energy wings and flapped them several times. A collective gasp spread through the meadow. He raised his energy sword high.
Heed my words, Mogwai. My name isn't important. I'm simply a herald for the Celestial Ones. They command you to serve them.
The Mogwai crouched down and visually cowered.
What would your masters have us do?
Our masters command you to grow as many babies as you can. An army is needed.
An army?
It looked around at the other Mogwai.
We would have to harvest thousands of humans to do this. We would be noticed. Our kind would be hunted to extinction.
Tove pointed his energy blade at the Mogwai's face.
The Celestial Ones are about to return. By the time you're finished with this task, the humans will be marching to the brink of extinction. Do this, and your kind will be greatly rewarded. Use the closest city as your feeding grounds.
The Mogwai gave Tove a weak smile.
So when should we start?
The strange emptiness that Tove experienced before throbbed in his throat again.
Now, you will start today.
So let me get this straight. Your mother's the head of the city militia in Onista, and your father is an Oni historian?
Yep. During the day, my mother would make sure that I received combat training and physical exercise. She didn't make it a secret that she wanted my brother and me to join the city militia when we became adults. At night, my father would put us to bed with wild and fantastic stories about ancient Onistan heroes and heroines.
A piece of amusement fell away, and she let out a small sigh.
It must have been nice to have grown up with both of your parents in your life. My siblings and I didn't have that luxury.
Noorie's innards tightened as he glanced at her.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
No, it's okay. We got through it just fine. Don't get me wrong. It was still pretty sad. It does help to remind myself that my parents were good people, though.
What were they like?
She slumped in her saddle a bit.
Oh, they were both amazing, hardworking people who loved life. I was 7 when they died. My brother was 9, and my little sister was only a baby. Let's change the subject, okay? I don't like dwelling on that period of my life.
Okay, so what brought you to Jedi?
Once more, a joyful expression covered the blonde's face.
My granny runs the farm, and she thought I needed to get out and see the world beyond the rice fields. I'm really glad she did. Even though I only came north a couple days' travel, it's still been a great experience. I'm not the simple girl I once was.
Simple doesn't even begin to cover it. To be quite honest, your transformation has been quite remarkable.
I wasn't that bad.
Trust me, darling, you were. It's not that you were bad per se. You were just ignorant of the many wondrous ways of expressing yourself through the medium of style.
Apisa rolled her eyes.
Anyway, I got to die, and it was really eye-opening. Granted, I was seen as a bit
unsophisticated, uncouth, raw.
Reiko gave Apisa a playful wink.
I was going to say charmingly rustic. If I remember correctly, you also had a hard time when you first came to Jedi. At least I made more friends than you did at first.
That's because these would-be nobles were intimidated by my incredible sense of taste. It's not my fault the West Coast is so far behind the East.
Apisa turned her attention to Noorie.
We arrived on the same day, and little Reiko made a few unkind remarks on one of the girls' outfits.
A vexed expression covered Reiko's face. She covered her arms over her chest.
If you're going to tell the story, you had better inform him of all the details. I swear you revel in any chance to make me look like a monster.
Okay. Granted, the girl that Reiko insulted was insulting me on the way I was dressed. She sorta came to my rescue at first, but then I came to her second.
Oh, so what happened?
Must we go into this with him?
Reiko gestured toward Noorie.
Why are we spilling our secrets to one of the help?
Flare looked up from her scroll. For most of the day so far, she had been ingrained in reading. Noorie had doubted that she had heard anything that was said.
That's mean. Even considering your disposition towards his people, you shouldn't be so cruel. He didn't do anything to you.
Reiko glared hard at Flera.
Well, excuse me for having feelings. It's not that I can just turn them off whenever I want. Am I just supposed to forget it ever happened?
Rather than shy away, Flare rolled up her scroll and returned Reiko's intensity.
I'm not saying that. I understand how you feel, but lashing out isn't going to make this trip any less bearable.
Reiko let out a huff and slowed her horse considerably. She still followed along, but she dropped back about 20 feet.
I'll go talk to her.
Apisa turned her horse around and trotted up to Reiko. Reiko said something, but Noorie didn't quite hear it. A thick, deep aura of unease gravitated toward the center of the stomach. No amount of repositioning made his saddle any more comfortable. Acid pooled in the back of his throat, and the urge to throw up enticed him over and over. Flare rode up beside him. She resumed using her meek voice.
I'm sorry about Reiko. It's not about you, exactly. I know it won't make sense now, but it's kind of not her fault she's acting this way either.
She seems to hate Onistans a lot more than the regular citizen. Why is that?
It's not my place to say.
Can I ask you a question? How is it that you didn't get a Chutar when you first came to Jedi? As a member of the royal family, you should have been better protected.
Flera averted her eyes and fumbled with the reins of her horse.
I begged my mother to let me come to Jedi as a normal person. I didn't want everyone to know I was the daughter of the Empress. I thought that would prevent me from making good friends.
So that's why you came up with the Silk Merchant alias.
Actually, it was my eldest sister, Cestus, who came up with that idea. She agreed that I needed to get out and be free to explore the magic of friendship without having titles affect people's reactions to me.
So, do you regret having a Chutar now?
Flare wilted in her saddle. Her voice came out in a barely audible mumble.
No offense, but yeah. I'm glad that you're coming with us on this journey, but your presence reminds me of my imperial obligations.
I promise that was never my intention. I never want to make people feel uncomfortable, but it's what I seem to be best at doing.
Like I said, it's not you.
Flare brushed away some loose strands of hair that had fallen in front of her eyes.
It's who you represent. At least this time it doesn't have to do with your racial origin.
Noorie smiled too. Apisa and Reiko rode back up to the group. Reiko sat straight in her saddle. She reviewed Noorie with a sense of poise and arrogance. Just seeing her demeanor made Norrie's skin expand and contract.
It has been brought to my attention that my behavior toward you has not been ladylike. For that I apologize. Though you need not know what ails me, just be certain that it has little to do with you.
She slowed her horse again and rode several feet behind him.
Excuse me.
She slowed her horse to match strides with Reiko, while Apisa caught up with Noorie.
All right, I have a string of jokes for you. I know you'll just have to laugh at one of them.
After the 5th joke, Noorie cracked a smile. As soon as Apisa saw it, she celebrated for the rest of the afternoon. They continued to talk about the difference between Onista and Buka. Noorie had to admit, it was quite enjoyable. Within an hour of sunset, Noorie and the group came upon a forest on a peninsula.
That's the forest from my dream. We have to go inside.
Do we know what dangers wait for us inside?
No. As soon as we set up camp, I'll describe my dream to you. Apisa and Reiko have already heard it before.
It didn't take long to set up the tents. Noorie had just finished creating a small campfire when Reiko stood over him.
In case there is danger in the forest, I'll make us less appetizing.
Reiko raised both hands above her head. Her tattoo flashed brightly. The air all around the camp shimmered, as if coated in glitter. Ripples of energy moved about, and structures formed from the empty spaces. A large military-style tent formed over the 3 tents that Noorie and the women had set up. The smoke from the campfire floated up into the sky from a hole that had been created at the top of the military tent. Noorie moved outside the perimeter of the military tent and gaped in wide wonder. A wooden fort with tall walls stood erect around them. Soldiers patrolled the tops of the walls, and they wore shiny and somewhat fashionable armor. A large blazing bonfire sat in the middle of the fort, and several soldiers gathered around it. A large gatehouse with a metal portcullis existed at the far end of the fort. After doing a quick count, Noorie noted there were over 36 soldiers talking, guarding, or doing other fort-related activities. Some soldiers roasted meat on the bonfire. Tasty aroma of cooking ham made Norrie's mouth water. His stomach growled loudly. Nearby soldiers talked about the recent rainstorm they had just had. Norrie's voice came out as a whisper.
Is this all an illusion?
Reiko placed her hands on her hips. A smug smirk beamed at him.
Well, of course it is, darling.
Will it remain active when you're sleeping?
Reiko's smirk grew in width. Noorie approached one of the guards and tried to reach out and touch her. The guard reacted and moved out of the way. A cross expression painted itself on the guard's face.
Watch it, you brute! Keep your paws to yourself.
The guard moved away from Noorie and resumed patrolling the interior of the fort. Noorie watched her go with his mouth agape.
I told you before, I'm the best damned illusionist in all of Jedi. To answer your question, yes, these works of art will not only remain active while I sleep, but they'll keep an eye out and wake us if anything troubling happens.
That's incredible.
Reiko examined her nails.
Of course it is, darling. I'm the one who created it. Now, stop looking at the background. Clara is going to tell you about her dream.
By the time that Noorie made it back to the real area of the campsite, Apisa and Flare had already seated themselves before the fire. They both appeared entirely satisfied.
I just hope you're not when we do magic too.
Flare giggled into her hands.
We're around magic so much that we're used to seeing fantastic things like this. It's always jarring to be around someone who's not used to witnessing arcane effects.
Noorie plopped down beside Flare.
I'll admit, this is not what I expected when I was first assigned this duty.
What did you expect?
To be honest, I thought I would be doing really boring stuff, like attending parties and going to events.
How exactly are going to parties and events boring?
Well, when you're the guest, you get to have fun. Parties and the like are great. But when you're a bodyguard, you don't get to relax.
I can't imagine going to a party and not having a good time. I love parties. Anyway, let's get down to business. Can you describe your dream?
Flare swallowed hard and settled herself into a relaxed position. She closed her eyes and remained quiet for a few moments.
Everything in my dream is so sudden and abrupt. I see some kind of ruin in the middle of the forest. I'm standing in a kind of spacious courtyard, and I see 3 buildings. I always go to the one on the left. Inside that building, I find a library full of scrolls. It's dark inside there. There's a little office towards the back of the library, and it's closed. I can't get inside, but I always stand on the outside of the door. A great desire to go inside always washes over me. Whenever I look over my shoulder, I get the uneasy feeling I'm not alone. Every time I have the dream, I feel the urgency increase.
Does anyone know what kind of ruin was in the forest?
Yeah. As soon as I had the dream, I went to the library at the university and did research on all the possibilities it could be. I think the ruin in the forest is a monastery called Wing Fei.
Grim expressions painted themselves on Apisa and Reiko's faces.
Why do I get the feeling that this is a bad thing?
Wing Fei Monastery was lost over 400 years ago. The information on it was kept in the restricted section of the library. Apparently, the monks at Wing Fei researched dark lore.
When you say dark lore, what are you referring to exactly?
I don't know, but I suppose we're going to find out.
So, are we going to do watches, or are you going to summon another kami to watch over us?
I already told you. My illusions will watch over us. You may be inexperienced with magic, you delightful fellow. But we are not. We are well cared for.
Apisa stood up and stretched.
Yeah, trust us. We know what we're talking about.
She moved to the girl's tent and ducked inside. Flair stood up and moved to the tent entrance too.
Good night, Mr. Noorie. I hope you can rest better than last night.
Reiko sat with him for a few moments before she also went to the tent. Before she entered it, she called out to one of the guards.
You there. Attend me.
The illusionary soldier ran up to her.
Yes, O beloved and beautiful creator.
Reiko gestured to Noorie.
This man is still nervous about the safety of the camp. Make sure if anything odd occurs, you wake him.
She peered at Noorie through the corner of her eye.
Does that make you feel better?
A little. Sleep well, O beloved and beautiful creator.
Don't be snide. It's unbecoming.
She entered the tent and closed the tent flap behind her. Noorie turned his attention to the rest of the camp. Even with Reiko out of sight, the illusions kept doing what normal soldiers would do. Rather than go to his tent, Noorie made his way around the fort. As he passed by soldiers, he eavesdropped on some of their conversations. To his surprise, they sounded organic and real. All of his senses told him he stood in a real fort, and yet his mind knew otherwise. Or did it? At one point he tried to climb the stairs that led to the top of the wall. When his leg passed through the wood, several of the illusionary guards turned on him.
Did you forget we're not real?
What do you expect from an Uneaston? All of this must be overwhelming for him.
A flash of anger pulsated behind Norie's eyes. Instead of responding back, he made his way back to his tent. Despite the supposed security of the area, Noorie kept his battle armor on and rested his Tetsubo beside him within reach. As his eyelids slowly closed, he placed his hand on the handle. A sea of blackness swept over him. Curious images bubbled up in the blackness, but they were swallowed up moments after appearing. Blood-red mountains lined the horizon. A crumbling building caved in on itself. An Oni walked through a familiar-looking city street. Why did that street look so familiar? A loud shout shattered the blackness and shook him awake. Noorie opened his eyes wide and grabbed his Tetsubo. He hopped to his feet and swung the Tetsubo in front of him. The war club passed through the illusionary soldier, but the man didn't appear offended in the least.
Sir, there's trouble. You're needed outside.
Noorie followed him out of the tent.